The sound of the rain hitting the roof of the temporary shelter I stood under was like a hiss, full of anger at fate for taking away the person I had loved for so long. I was here alone. The others left me alone, giving me the opportunity to say goodbye in private. Two workers stood a little further away, allowing me the illusion of privacy. The coffin was already lowered into the gaping hole, and a canopy protected it from the rain until the grave was filled in, cutting it off forever from the world above. Now alone, I let the tears flow. I cried with grief for the person who understood me, who supported me and gave me my life back. I will miss this friendship, the company, and the love that was given to me without regard for anything, for so long. Tears flowed, and in my thoughts I replayed over and over again the moments of our life together, all the wonderful gifts that she brought into my destiny. The beginning of the end of my other life began from the moment I saw Albert leave the room and head down the corridor to our bedroom. I waited until he closed the door behind him, and then I broke through. I began to cry, covering my face with my hands, giving vent to my grief. I sobbed until I was choking, and then I curled up on the couch with my legs tucked to my chest and cried some more. I couldn't hold back any longer. This had been coming for a long time, and now I was completely absorbed in it. I cried for many reasons, not the least of which was guilt and a sense of betrayal towards my husband and our marriage, but also the loss of our life together, the loss of my husband in his depression and deception. To understand what brought me to this point, I went back to the beginning. My husband's name is Albert Bennington. Most people remember him for a scandal a few years ago when the company he worked for became involved in national security matters. It was written about in the newspapers and talked about on national television. I'm his wife, Angelina, or just Angie, as my friends call me. We have been married for over 33 years. I am 53 and Allah is 55. We have a daughter, Jennifer, who is now 30, but we have not seen or communicated with her for more than 10 years. She was adopted and caused problems from the moment she learned to run away from home. In short, she left home at the age of 19, already pregnant, and since then we have had no contact with her. Al worked for a company that sold machine parts to foreign companies. His work involved government contracts, and there was always some shady scheme between those to whom the parts were sold. I never understood the details, and Al tried to shield me from it. He worked there for 14 years and quickly rose through the ranks until he became president and chief financial officer. That's when a scandal broke and Al was accused of money laundering involving an Iranian company. The Justice Department sued and charges were brought against Al and several other men. The trial was difficult and accusations flew in different directions. This process lasted more than 2 years, and during this time Al tried to hide most of our assets offshore. The FBI was able to find and freeze many of these accounts, and money became a problem for us. We sold our house and cars and moved to more modest housing. Against Allah's will, I finally decided to get a job. I needed her to keep me sane and also to supplement our budget a little. I found a job at a bank, starting as a teller and eventually working my way up to agent level, working with corporate accounts. The trial pushed Allah into deep depression. Of course, he lost his job and couldn't find a new one while he was under indictment. He spent most of our money on lawyers, and our finances went from moderate to zero in less than 2.5 years. By the end of the first trial, Al had lost almost all of our money and property, and his health began to deteriorate. By the time all the appeals were over, we were left with only my income and living in a small, one-story, two-bedroom house outside the city. This was all we could afford. All this time I stayed with Al and didn't even think about divorce. I was his wife and promised to be with him in joy and sorrow, in wealth and poverty. It was the worst period, and we became poor, but I stayed close. Unfortunately, our marriage began to suffer almost from the moment the charges were brought against us. All of us had a strong and stable marriage, and for more than 30 years we had few problems. Our sex life wasn't particularly colorful, but it was quite fulfilling, and we both enjoyed our moments of intimacy. I had 2 settings for making love. One I called pleasure mode and the other pain mode. It didn't really hurt, but that's what Al and I called it. In pleasure mode, I loved to please Allah by satisfying him and then letting him just lie back while I took the lead and made love to him. I didn't always feel pleasure at such moments, but that didn't matter to me. The main thing was that it made him happy. Pain mode was more traditional, with all taking the lead. We liked both approaches equally. We developed a certain routine. We usually made love after parties, or almost always at least once on the weekend. All loved getting up on Saturday mornings, going to the kitchen and bringing chilled fruit back to bed. We sat in bed, ate fruit, and then made love. Sometimes this happened several times in the morning, and we both liked it, although, of course, at our age, it meant that we spent the entire first half of the day in bed. But it was our time, and we appreciated it. When the trials began, and then our affairs began to decline, our intimate life gradually faded away. After the first trial, we practically stopped making love, and this happened no more than once or twice a month, and only in those cases when Allah was having a particularly difficult day and needed support. These moments became a kind of consolation for us. I didn't mind them. On the contrary, I even waited for them, because that was all I could give him. But after the trial and subsequent appeals, everything stopped completely, and all never again turned to me for consolation. After the appeals and already in the third year of unemployment, Allah's depression worsened. This happened gradually, and I did not notice it, since I was at work almost all day. Everyone stayed at home and did almost nothing, but I didn't complain. I hoped that he would be able to overcome this condition, because he managed to avoid a prison sentence. I tried to push him to start calling his friends and try to find a job, but if he did something, he didn't tell me about it. It got to the point where I insisted that he see a psychologist. She listened to him and eventually prescribed antidepressants. I made sure he took them, but there was no noticeable improvement. He went to appointments twice a week, but we couldn't afford it, and he soon stopped seeing the doctor. At that time, I was already working for a large bank that was expanding by acquiring small banks and savings companies. It was a good place to work, and I moved up the career ladder quickly. I already held the position of account manager, and I had 4 people subordinate to me. They were all young and worked well. I loved my job and looked forward to the morning so I could immerse myself in it again. I understood that this was partly due to the fact that I just wanted to run away from Allah. He didn't seem to care. He never showed interest in my work or asked about it. I was subordinate to a man about my age who was very attractive and pleasant to talk to. His name was Haywood Meissner, but we all called him Woody. He trained me when I first started working at the bank, and it was he who recommended me to management when it came time to appoint a new department head. He was divorced and lived alone in a prestigious area. At one time, all and I could have been his neighbors. Woody was also a good friend and confidant to me during those difficult times during and immediately after the trial. He supported me and was always ready to listen. I suspected that he would want more than just friendship, but he never insisted, and I remained faithful to my husband and marriage. By the time all had been unemployed for more than 3 years, and his depression had dragged on for almost a year and a half, he still continued to take pills prescribed by a psychologist, although this did not bring much improvement. One evening, during one of our quarrels, all unexpectedly said that he had a friend who might help him get a job. I forgot what we were fighting about because I was overcome with joy and I started asking him about the details, but he just shrugged his shoulders and said that it was too early to talk about it. He said that the meeting was scheduled for one of the next days, and then he would be able to tell me more. That night we went to bed, and I thought that maybe all would want to make love, but when I tried to take the initiative, he simply turned away and turned off the light. I was overcome with resentment, anger, and disappointment. He seemed to no longer care about me, nor about our marriage and intimacy. I cried quietly, but he didn't seem to notice. I fell asleep feeling lonely and depressed, lying next to my husband of 33 years. The next morning, while I was getting ready for work, I was still sleeping. This was common, as he rarely got up before noon. I woke him up to see how his meeting was going, but he just muttered that it was scheduled for late before rolling over and covering his head with the pillow. I left him alone, finished getting dressed, and went to work. I usually ate breakfast at a diner near the bank because they never cooked breakfast. As I was finishing my coffee, Woody walked into the diner and noticed me. He came up and suddenly asked if he could join. This surprised me since I had never seen him here before, and he had never even invited me for a cup of coffee before. I said that, of course, he could sit down, and he sat down opposite me. I saw you sitting alone and thought we could spend a few free minutes together before work. We hardly see each other outside of work. I hope you don't mind. Of course not, Woody. You are very helpful. I just need the company of a friend right now. Trouble in paradise. I hope all is well. Allah is the problem. Life with him is far from heaven. Yesterday, I was hoping he might have some hope, but I'm afraid he just made up a story about a possible job to get me to stop pressuring him. Woody and I talked for the next 15 minutes until it was time to go to work. Rising from the table, he extended his hand to me, and I shook it. I'd like to continue this conversation if you don't mind. How about dinner tonight? I was stunned and didn't know what to answer. I looked into his eyes, but saw only friendliness and care there. For some reason, this gave me confidence, and I agreed. We agreed to meet after work and walk to a restaurant a block from the bank. That way, we wouldn't have to worry about cars. I returned to work in high spirits, telling myself it was just dinner with my boss and a friend who wanted to support me. I barely saw Woody for the rest of the day and had lunch with one of my subordinates. We went to the same diner where I usually had breakfast and just talked about small things until I mentioned my upcoming dinner with Woody. My colleague immediately perked up and started questioning me. Well, spit it out. What's happening? Woody is such a nice man, I would give anything to date him. Is this serious? Tell me everything. It's just dinner, and we're just going to continue the conversation we started at breakfast. He is simply showing friendly attention and nothing more. I'm married, and he knows about it. So you already had breakfast together. Good girl. I know he's interested in you. You should have noticed the way he looks at you when you're not looking. It's a shame he doesn't look at me like that. Frankly, her words surprised me. I'd never thought of Woody in that way, and I certainly hadn't noticed him looking at me in any particular way. But now this thought made me slightly nervous. I may not have thought about it before, but now. Stop such talk. He's my boss, and that's all. We'll just have dinner, and then I'll go home. That's it. But I was no longer so sure of it. We finished lunch and returned to the bank, but now I began to pay attention to Woody and noticed that he actually glanced in my direction several times. I decided I was being stupid and tried not to think about it for the rest of the day. Since I'm a department manager, I worked until 4:30 p.m. and was usually one of the last to leave the office. That evening, knowing that we had dinner, I stayed a little late, finishing my work only by 17:30. Before I left, I called home to tell all that I would be late. The phone rang, but no one answered, so I left a message on the answering machine, thinking he would listen to it later. I finished work, freshened up in the break room, and walked towards Woody's office to find him. Are you finishing already? I can go when you're ready. Give me another 10 minutes, and we can go. Come in and wait until I finish. He invited me into his office, and I sat down on the sofa, looking around his cozy office. I watched him while he made some calls and worked on the computer. This time I realized that I looked at him as a man, and not just as my boss. I was pleasantly surprised, wondering what he might be like outside of work. I was lost in thought, but his voice brought me back to reality. Hello, you are somewhere far away. What are you thinking about? Of course, I couldn't tell him the truth, so I made a meaningless comment about work. She stood up and followed him as he left, locking the door. We went to a restaurant together, and I started to relax and enjoy his company when we were seated at a table. Dinner went well, and I completely forgot about all my problems while listening to Woody talk about his life. He shared with me the story of his marriage, ex-wife, and children. He and his wife separated quite peacefully. His children are already adults, so there were no conflicts between them. They got together on holidays and had a good time. He was especially proud of his 2 grandchildren. I asked him why he got divorced, and he simply said they were growing apart. I said I was sorry, but he said that they both knew in advance that sooner or later they would break up, and he had no regrets. Then he asked me about Allah, and I told him about my worries. I spoke to him in a way I had never spoken to anyone else and shared my frustrations and fears. I told him that I was worried that all would not come out of his depression and that I didn't know what would happen to us as a couple. I told him this and much more. I told him about how our intimate life faded away and how everything was before. For some reason, I didn't feel awkward discussing such personal topics with him. It seemed that by saying all this, I was getting rid of a heavy burden, and I felt better. We talked over dinner, and when the main topics were exhausted, we ordered dessert. We took one piece of cake for two and drank coffee. I felt almost in seventh heaven. It was at this moment that my life changed dramatically. Angie, this may not be the best time or place, but I have to say I admire you for everything you've been through. I know the price you paid, but I also understand that it made you stronger. Thank you, Woody. It was a blessing that you listened to me and allowed me to share my pain with you. I really appreciate it. You're welcome, but I did it for my own reasons. I really like you as a woman, and I have been watching you for a long time. I find you very attractive. His words stunned me, but at the same time flattered me. I didn't know what to answer, so I just smiled at him and said nothing. I hope I'm not overstepping my boundaries. I don't want you to misunderstand me, but I would like to continue seeing you outside of work. I would like to take you to dinner, to the theater, to dancing, to anything that you might like. Now I was completely confused. On the one hand, I understood that, as a married woman, I should not accept his invitation. But given all's condition, I had no other outlet, and Woody was a very pleasant person, and, it seemed to me, quite reliable. I would like to, Woody. But since I'm married, I need to be sure that all will not mind. He doesn't go out anywhere, but I don't know how he will perceive my desire to go somewhere. I won't do this without his knowledge. Certainly. Don't do anything that might make you feel uncomfortable. Just let me know when you decide, okay? After that, we talked some more, and then Woody walked me to the car. When I opened the door, he leaned over and kissed me on the lips. I kissed him back before I realized what I was doing. Suddenly, I pulled away and Woody apologized. Sorry, it was unexpected for me too. I hope I didn't offend you. No, it's okay. It was just a little unexpected. Well, good night. With these words, I got into the car, started the engine, and drove home, full of contradictions. On the way home, I remembered the kiss, and a pleasant, warm feeling spread in my chest. By the time I got home, I had already pulled myself together and calmly entered the house. I looked for Allah and found him upstairs in bed. It was only 8:15, and he was already asleep. I went in to check on him and saw that he was fast asleep. I changed my clothes and went downstairs to take care of business. I noticed that my message on the answering machine remained unheard, and everyone only ate a bag of chips for dinner. I sat down at the table, staring at the flashing message indicator and the empty packaging, and couldn't stand it. I started crying. Finally, I went to bed, wondering what I should do now. Listening to Allah's breathing next to me, I gradually came to the decision that I wanted to be with Woody. I wanted a little joy and excitement in my life, and All had long ago decided to distance himself from me. I didn't plan to do anything other than enjoy the things Woody suggested: dancing, movies, maybe going to the theater. I wanted to spend evenings with friends, playing cards or having barbecues outdoors. I wanted fun. Under these thoughts, I finally fell asleep, realizing that I would accept Woody's invitation and not tell All about it. In the following weeks and months, things began to change. I would meet Woody after work 2 or 3 times a week, and we would go to different places and do different things. Woody was a consummate gentleman, and I enjoyed our meetings. My days at work flew by quickly, but my evenings at home dragged on forever. I talked to All less and less, and he sank deeper and deeper into depression, but I didn't care. At home, everything remained unchanged, but I felt that I myself was changing. I started eating less and exercising more. I tried to dress better and bought a few new things that flattered my figure. I even bought a new perfume and started wearing more elegant underwear. Although I was never overweight, over time I lost muscle tone and my style became less vibrant, but now everything has changed. I received compliments at work and my colleagues noticed the changes. I attributed it to lifestyle changes, diet, and exercise, although most of them thought otherwise but said nothing. Everything continued like this for several months until I stopped worrying about Allah's condition and began to take more care of myself. Everything was innocent until one day the decisive evening came. Woody and I just attended an outdoor concert tonight, and the night was absolutely perfect. As we walked toward the parking lot and Woody's car, he took my hand and didn't let go. I wanted to pull my hand away, but then I let him hold it, and even slightly squeezed his palm in response. He looked at me and smiled. "Did you like the concert? I enjoyed the music and being with you. It was wonderful. The music still plays in my head. I'll probably be humming it for a few days." Woody laughed and then suddenly stopped. He turned my face towards him and kissed me passionately, right in the parking lot. I didn't resist, and after overcoming the pause, I responded to his kiss. I hugged his neck and pulled his face towards mine. We continued to hug as his hand slid down my back and pressed me tightly against his body. I felt his excitement and enjoyed this feeling. It's been so long since I felt like a woman. I rubbed myself against him, hearing his quiet moans. We stayed like that for a few more moments before we released our embrace, both barely breathing. "Will you come to see me today? I want you so much. Please come to my house." I didn't have to think long. I understood what he wanted, and I wanted it myself. I wanted him to take me so I could feel like a woman again. "Yes, I will go with you. I want you to take me to your bed and make love to me." We hurried to his car. For a second I had doubts, but I quickly cast them aside. I knew what I wanted and needed it. Allah left me alone a long time ago. I wanted intimacy, and Woody wanted it too. I relaxed, leaned back in the seat, and when Woody reached for my hand, I took his hand and pressed it to my chest. He looked at me with a bright sparkle in his eyes, and it ignited my inner fire. I again felt that long-forgotten excitement and was on the verge of crying with joy. Woody parked the car and led me into his house. I looked around as he closed the garage and put away the keys. He checked everything around to make sure everything was okay, and then he took my hand and led me down the narrow hallway to the bedroom. It was small but neat, with a bathroom barely big enough for a bathtub and shower. I didn't care about the situation. I looked at the bed, walked over to it, and sat down on the edge. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching Woody, who stood looking at me. I smiled at him and slowly unbuttoned my blouse, letting it slide off my shoulders. Then she reached for the clasp on the back and, unclasping her bra, took it off too, letting it fall to her knees. I leaned back, proudly showing off my breasts. I have always had beautiful breasts size 36D. They still looked attractive. Woody looked at me and I stood up to unzip my skirt. The skirt slid smoothly down. I stepped out of it and out of the shoes, leaving only white satin panties. I put them on especially for this evening, hoping that everything would happen exactly like that. But that's where my courage ended, and I sat down on the bed again, continuing to look at Woody. Woody looked at me while I was doing this impromptu dance for him, and suddenly he realized that he was still fully clothed. He hastily began to undress, though less gracefully than I did, but the result was the same. Left only in his boxers, he went into the bathroom, where he turned on the water. A minute later, he returned and turned off the light, leaving only the small night lamp on the dresser by the bed. There was enough light for us to see each other. When Woody approached me, I extended my hand towards him, pulling him towards me. He tried to sit next to me, but I stopped him. I was in my pleasure mode and wanted to please him. She sank down next to him, feeling his warmth and carefully touching his hand. The soft light of the room illuminated them, and the atmosphere seemed saturated with something deep and personal. At such moments, she always experienced not only physical closeness, but also inner peace, which grew as their connection became deeper. She allowed herself to relax, just lying next to him, feeling his breath and catching the rhythm of his heart. At this moment, there was no need for words. Their unity was expressed in every touch and look. In her mind, she recalled the past, the times when she and all shared such moments. With him, they had a special chemistry, understanding at a glance and harmony, which they came to without hesitation. All always appreciated such moments, knowing how important it is to feel needed and loved. She remembered how much he liked it when she took the lead, but at the same time gave him freedom for his desires. This internal memory of past experiences gave her a sense of security and self-confidence. However, with Woody it was different. Despite all the warmth, their connection was just beginning to form. With him, she felt a slight excitement because she was trying to establish a new, unique harmony. His every gesture and glance indicated that he, too, was learning to catch her rhythm, understanding her more and more with every moment. She caught herself thinking that this feeling discovery of each other had its own special charm. They both had to be patient and flexible as they each had their own experiences and expectations for these moments. As he shifted his position slightly, she noticed that he was taking more initiative, inviting her to follow him. She trusted him, willing to go along with his desires and maintaining warmth and trust in this moment. Their movements were synchronized, and with each passing moment, there was a feeling of calm as each of them gave the other the opportunity to express himself as needed. She realized that every moment they shared was an opportunity to get to know each other better, to feel him more deeply, and to let him understand herself. When it was all over, they just lay there, enjoying the silence that filled the room. She smiled as she felt his hand touch her softly. At that moment, she realized that their journey was just beginning, and every such evening would be another step towards finding the harmony that she valued so much in past relationships. He seemed pleased too. His eyes glowed with warmth, and his facial expression indicated that he had achieved inner peace and contentment. She watched him, feeling how their connection was gradually filled with new meaning and became stronger. At that moment, she realized that this path of their rapprochement, consisting of understanding and care, could lead them to real intimacy, built on trust and mutual respect. After a while, I looked at my watch and realized that it was time for me to leave. It was already past 2 o'clock in the morning. I showered, got dressed, and finally said goodbye to Woody, leaving him in bed. It was 3:30 a.m. when I quietly entered the house. It was dark and quiet inside, and I thought that all, as usual, was already asleep. I walked into the kitchen, where everything was neat and clean. I sank into a chair, and thoughts of the past evening and intimacy with another man flooded my mind, forcing me to relive moments of passion that, although not what I had imagined, still brought me a feeling of new freedom. I was lost in my thoughts until I accidentally noticed a white note on the table, lying between the salt and pepper shakers. I froze, looking at her, until my gaze focused on the words written in Allah's handwriting. The note said he left dinner in the oven for me. He wrote that it should still be warm, and that he had left some fresh fruit in the refrigerator for dessert. I read the note with confusion, looking around the kitchen again. The oven light was indeed on, indicating that the food was in warming mode. I opened the refrigerator and saw a bowl of chopped fruit, which had already darkened a little from long storage. A strange uneasiness came over me as I looked around again. At what point did I first notice that the house became clean and tidy? I couldn't remember, but now, sitting here, everything became clearer. As I continued to reflect, I realized that I had not had to go grocery shopping for some time. All began preparing full dinners and usually left some food for my return. When I cooked for us, everyone seemed to eat later, and I didn't think much of it. I was so absorbed in my relationship with Woody that I didn't notice these changes when I came home late. Everyone never asked me what I was doing, and I decided a long time ago that I would not tell him about it. When did everything change? What's happened? I didn't know, but I felt my stomach begin to clench with fear that had nothing to do with hunger. I assumed that all didn't pay attention to my coming and going. I thought that he didn't care where I was or what I was doing. He and I haven't spoken much lately, but now I'm wondering if it's because I've been home less and less before he goes to bed. This evening is a clear example. It was already after 3 o'clock in the morning, and I didn't even call to warn him that I would be staying so late. In fact, I haven't told Alu anything about what I'm doing for a long time. How did this happen? Suddenly, I realized that I didn't know the answer. With slight trepidation, I went to the bedroom, not knowing what to expect, but all was fast asleep. He didn't seem to notice that I came so late. Usually, he slept so deeply that he did not hear my late returns. But today, as I slid into bed next to him, he suddenly turned to me and said in a sleepy voice, "Did you have a good evening?" and then turned away again and quickly fell asleep. I froze, lying next to him, not knowing what to fear more, this simple phrase or his silent calm. I lay there until the morning, listening to the light of dawn slowly flood the room. Finally, I got up and headed to the kitchen to make myself some coffee. After last night, I needed a strong caffeine fix. I didn't know what to expect when all woke up. Obviously, he had changed, and I had no idea how long ago the change had happened. It was about 8 in the morning when all entered the kitchen. He looked at me and asked for coffee. I stood up, poured him a cup, and handed it to him, while he sat down at the table. Returning to my place, I just looked at him for a while. I was amazed at how much he had changed. His face looked fresh and toned, his eyes were clear and attentive, and his posture was reminiscent of the former image of Allah to which I was accustomed. When did this happen? What time did you come last night? I tried to stay up until I waited for you, but I didn't know where you went or with whom, so I just left dinner for you in the oven. Did you find my note? Again, a striking change. It was the same old Al. This was not the same person I had lived with for the last 2 or 3 years. What changed and when? Yes, I found it. Thanks for this. Yesterday, I went with the girls to an outdoor concert. Then we went to one of their houses, and I lost track of time. I'm sorry I didn't give you my number, but I didn't think you'd notice. You're probably right. I wouldn't have noticed before. But something has changed, and I understand that you had to take care of yourself all this time. I have no right to ask where you go and with whom. I'm sorry. His contrite tone was almost enough to make me cry. After what I did last night, he didn't feel like he had the right to ask me questions about it. I needed to leave before I lost control. I stood up and, taking my cup to the sink, answered, "No, I should have told you about my plans. I'm sorry, and it won't happen again. I'll change." I left the kitchen so as not to burst into tears. I walked into the bathroom, closed the door, and sat on the floor, shaking. I knew what was happening. A crushing guilt for cheating on her husband suddenly rolled in. Not just last night. This was the final step. The first step was taken a few weeks ago when I first met Woody without telling Al. I stayed on the bathroom floor for at least an hour, trying to sort through my feelings: guilt, despair, deception, and hopelessness. I needed to make a decision, and quickly. About 2 hours later, I went out to talk to Al. He was sitting in the kitchen and reading a newspaper. I noticed that the dishes had been washed. When I entered, he looked up and smiled. I looked into the face of the man I had lived with for so many years, and this time I saw the man I married, and not the man he had been for the last 3 years. My heart sank at the sight of this. I loved this man for most of my adult life. I still loved him. This made what I was about to do even more difficult. "Al, I need to talk to you. If possible, I would like to say everything that needs to be said without interruption. Do you mind? Please." He put down the newspaper and looked at me with all his attention. He just smiled encouragingly at me and told me I could talk. I sat down opposite him at the table. I started with a heavy heart, but with the conviction that this had to be done. "I want to say that I am glad to see what you have become. It is obvious that you have made significant changes and are better than you have been in years. I don't know what happened, and I'm sorry that I was so immersed in my own world that I didn't even notice. This is unforgivable on my part, and I am very sorry." Al tried to interrupt me, but I asked him not to. I took his hand and, raising it to my lips, continued. "I tried for so long to support you through trials and appeals, but you began to withdraw into yourself, and I felt that you were leaving me. I didn't know what to do, but I had a job, I had friends, and I turned to them for support. This was my first mistake. I turned my back on you." About 2 months ago, I started hanging out with Woody, my boss at work. He is divorced and single, and I also felt lonely most of the time, and we started doing things together. We went to plays, movies, sometimes danced, and the like. It was always just friendly, and he always acted like a real gentleman. It's not a problem. The problem is that I didn't tell you about it and started trying to hide it from you. I watched Al while I told my story. He didn't seem to be worried yet, and in his gaze I saw understanding and sadness, but not doubt. I wasn't sure how he would react to the next part, but I needed to move on. We went to a concert last night. I know I lied to you when I told you I was going with the girls, but that wasn't the case. I went with Woody. The concert was great, the evening was perfect, and we were so happy after it that when he offered to go to his house, I agreed. I looked up at his face to see how he was beginning to understand where this was going. I continued before I lost my resolve. I spent the night with him, and he loved me. I allowed him, I encouraged him myself, and did with him what I had only done with you before. I'm really sorry I did this, and I'm sorry I had to tell you about it. I was unfaithful and betrayed our marriage. I'm sorry. Now that it was said, I felt relieved. I didn't know what would happen next, but I had to tell him. This was my husband, and I knew I loved him just as much as I did before he got sick. I was scared of what might happen, but I had to tell him the truth. Albert didn't say anything when I finished. He looked at me sadly, and I saw tears begin to well up in his eyes, but he remained silent. He seemed to want to say something, but couldn't find the words. Finally, he got up from the table and left the kitchen, walking along the corridor to our bedroom. That's how I ended up in this situation. I did something unthinkable. I cheated on my husband, who left me alone with his depression, and I did it of my own free will. I enjoyed last night, and I remember all I wanted was to make Woody happy. I wanted to please him the same way I had always tried to please my husband before. But today, standing in front of me was no longer the same person I cheated on. Now I was about to meet my husband, the man I had lived with for 33 years, and not the indifferent, depressed man he had been for the last few years. He came back some time ago, but I just didn't notice it. All this time I took care of myself, thinking only about myself. And now I had to admit to him that I had betrayed our marriage and turned away from the man I married simply because he was sick, and I could not keep my promise to be there in sickness and in health. I walked out the door, got into the car, and drove to Woody's house. He opened the door when I was already approaching his house and came out to meet me. When he saw the expression on my face, he silently hugged me, and I burst into tears on his chest. He held me tightly in the middle of the yard, allowing me to cry. I cried so hard that I was shaking, but he didn't say a word. He was just waiting for me to calm down so I could tell him what happened. He didn't even blink when I said I confessed to all about what happened last night. He just let me talk. He asked me what I was going to do. I honestly answered that now everything depends on my husband. I told him that I loved Al as much as ever, and that the thought of losing him scared me to death. I admitted that I didn't know what I would do if Al left me. He listened carefully and then said something I never expected. You know I love you, right? I have loved you since the first time I saw you. If he leaves you, I will always be there and would like you to become my wife. I didn't know what to say, but I had to be honest with him. I didn't love him that much, and I could never consider marriage to anyone other than Al. If Al leaves, I'll be alone because I'll never get married again. I can't love another man the way I love Al. I told him this, and his face showed sadness and disappointment, but he accepted my words. He even said that he would still marry me if I agreed, and perhaps with time I could fall in love with him. I smiled sadly, but told him that it was impossible for me. I returned home to meet Al, but found him strangely calm. He was sitting in the family room watching TV without looking up when I entered. I sat in my chair and just watched him for a while. Finally, I decided to speak. Don't you want to tell me anything? Aren't you mad at me for what I did? I won't blame you if you want to yell at me and tell me how stupid I am. I just need to know how you feel right now. I don't know what I feel. Yes, I'm angry, but I also understand the incredible pressure you've been under these last 3 years. If you need someone else, I can understand that. It hurts, but I understand. But I had no excuse for what I did. I made a promise to you 33 years ago, and I had to find the courage to either keep it or say I wanted to leave. I did neither one nor the other. I'm ashamed of what I did, and I don't expect you to forgive me. I can't forgive myself. You shouldn't think like that. I pushed you to do this. I know this and accept the blame. You are a wonderful woman, and I'm not surprised you found someone else. You don't understand. I haven't found anyone else. I found you again, and you are all I need. I love you more than my own life. Woody was just a reminder of the woman I once was, the woman you married. I can't explain why I let it get this far. I didn't want this and didn't think about it for many months while we spent time with him. You don't have to tell me all this. I said I understand. You and I haven't been close in years. I don't blame you for looking elsewhere. I don't blame. Please don't make excuses for what I did. I was wrong, and you should be angry at me for betraying you. You never left me, even when everything was falling apart. You were sick and needed me, and I wasn't there. You know it's true, so don't make excuses for me. I cannot and will not justify myself. I did something bad, and I will never forgive myself for it. Al and I talked for the next few hours. I became increasingly frustrated that he wasn't angry at me and didn't put all the blame on me like I thought he should. He should have been angry, even furious, but he remained calm and tried to take all the blame for my betrayal on himself. I didn't let him do that. But as the hours passed, I began to suspect that perhaps I had finally destroyed all the love he had for me, and that was why he could not get angry. He didn't care. The longer we talked, the more I began to believe it. Finally, I got up and went into the bedroom to cry alone. I realized that I had lost everything. We talked to each other for several days, but never came to any agreements or mutual understanding. Al continued to remain calm and did not blame me, and I continued to expect that he would finally show anger and disappointment, but this did not happen. We lived together, but apart. I became depressed and my work began to suffer. Woody covered for me at work and eventually suggested I take time off. I agreed and went home to try to salvage what I could from our broken marriage. One day soon after this, Al told me that he needed to go away for a few days to meet with a potential employer. I wanted to go with him, but he refused, saying that he would constantly move from place to place and he would not have time for me. I finally agreed to stay home while he left. By the end of the next day, I began to suspect that something was wrong when I didn't hear from him. He didn't call, and when I tried to call his cell phone, the calls went straight to voicemail. I kept trying to contact him, but to no avail. 3 days later, the doorbell rang. I opened it and saw an unfamiliar man with a briefcase in one hand and an envelope in the other. I asked what he needed. "Are you Mrs. Angelina Bennington, Albert Bennington's wife?" "Yes, it's me." "Who are you and what do you need?" "My name is Henry Green. I am Mr. Bennington's lawyer. Can I come in for a few minutes? I have something for you from your husband. It's important that I explain a few things to you." With a premonition of trouble and confusion, I invited him to enter. He walked straight into the kitchen and placed his briefcase and envelope on the table in front of him. He looked at me, waiting for me to join. I walked in slowly and sat down, not knowing what to expect. "Where is my husband, Mr. Green? Where is he and why are you here?" "First of all, Mr. Bennington left the country, but hired me to handle some important details. He wanted you to have this first." "Left the country? What does it mean?" I tried to comprehend his words when he handed me an envelope. I opened it and found a divorce agreement inside, already signed by Al and notarized. I couldn't read it through my tears, but the lawyer took it and began to read out the terms. Clause 1, I waive all rights to the property set forth below and assign such rights to my wife, Angelina Bennington. Clause 2, I agree to pay the sum of $1,500 per week into the account designated by Angelina for her personal disposal. Clause 3, I agree to repay in full the $2,500 mortgage balance, existing on the property listed below by the last day of the current month. Clause 4. I waive all claims to any property or property remaining in the property listed below. All assets are transferred without any conditions to Angelina Bennington. These are the only terms of the divorce agreement requested by Mr. Bennington. The property in question is your home and all the property in it. Are these conditions satisfactory to you? I just nodded my head in shock. Where did Al get the money to pay off the mortgage and pay me that much weekly? I was confused and completely depressed. Mr. Bennington entered into an agreement with the federal government to provide information about certain transactions in exchange for access to his foreign accounts. I can tell you that these bills, as far as I know, do not exceed the amount offered to you. This is enough to guarantee the promised amounts, but no more. He then opened his briefcase and handed me several photographs of me and Woody taken in his apartment the night I betrayed our marriage. I looked at them in horror. How were they made, and who made them? The photos were so close that the photographer should have been standing right next to us, but I knew that was impossible. Many of the pictures showed me in revealing poses. I looked up at the man watching me. His face remained serene and neutral. Mr. Bennington asked me to give them to you and tell you that the negatives have been destroyed. You now have all existing copies. If you're wondering how they were made, the cameras were mounted in a photo frame sitting on Mr. Meissner's dresser. It was established as part of surveillance of you and Mr. Bennington. Since you yourself told him about your betrayal, Mr. Bennington did not consider it necessary to save these photographs. Finally, Mr. Bennington asked me to give you this disc. It's sealed, and I don't know what's on it. It is meant only for you. If you need to contact me regarding any issue, or if you need anything not covered in the agreement, please call me at this number. With these words, he handed me a business card, closed his briefcase, and said that he would come out himself. He left me there, alone, with a ruined life and a broken marriage. I sat in the kitchen, looking at the photographs scattered on the table, depicting me as the depraved woman I had become that night, and at the divorce papers that resulted from my behavior. I couldn't understand what had happened to my life. I knew what I had done, but never in my wildest dreams could I have imagined the consequences I would reap. I couldn't immediately look at what was on the disc. I needed to do something to keep myself from going crazy. I ran out to the car and just drove around the city for several hours. I had no purpose, no real friends other than Woody, and no one I could trust. I was completely alone, and now I realize it. A few hours later, I returned home, not knowing what to do. I parked in the driveway, but couldn't bring myself to get out of the car. I sat there for a long time, but in the end, I realized that I couldn't put it off any longer. I entered the house to finally listen to the disc and hear Al's last words. I made myself some strong coffee, brought out the CD player, and set it on the kitchen table, the table where Al and I had discussed so much. The same table that had the little note on it when Al came back to me. He prepared dinner for me. I realized this too late. I turned on the disc and heard Al's voice. Angie, by now you know I left, but I didn't leave because of what you did. I left because of what I did. I have caused you so much pain these past few years. I have brought you humiliation, despair, and grief in abundance. I understand this now, but I realized it too late. I'm so sorry I did this to you. For a long time, I was reluctant to tell federal agents what they wanted to hear, out of a twisted sense of loyalty to people who didn't care about me at all. They only cared about profit, just like me. But by pursuing their interests, I harmed you and our marriage, and forgot that my first loyalty should have been to us. I finally realized it one day, about 2 weeks ago, when I woke up late in the morning after you left for work. I spent most of the day just sitting there feeling sorry for myself and wanting to talk to you. I was waiting for you to come home, but I fell asleep in the living room and slept through dinner. You came in, made yourself something to eat, but apparently went out again, so when I finally woke up, you were no longer there. I waited for you all evening, but, as usual, I went to bed so early that I was already asleep when you returned. The next morning, I realized that the whole day had gone by and I still hadn't seen or talked to you. This may have happened before, but I was so consumed with self-pity that I didn't even notice. That's when I decided to change my life. The next morning, I called the prosecutor's office and offered to cooperate with them in exchange for help in returning to normal life. They referred me to a psychotherapist, and I started working with him. I stopped taking my medication a while ago, but you didn't know about it. This time I stayed with them, and because I was desperate to change my life, I quickly began to make progress. You didn't know anything about this because you were usually out in the evenings. When I was able to function normally again, I made certain arrangements with the agents to allow me access to some of my accounts as long as I gave them the information they needed. We worked together to prepare the terms that Mr. Green announced to you along with this disc. At this point, I paused the recording to comprehend what I heard. Everything he said was news to me, and I did not know what he was hiding from the authorities. All this time he could have cooperated with them, and then our lives would have been completely different. I was filled with anger when I finally understood what he was talking about. I wanted to know more. I turned the recording back on. I didn't take the photos you have now. They were taken during routine monitoring of us. They always knew who you were with and who I worked with. I didn't know or even suspect anything until they spoke to me a couple of weeks ago and said they had been following us for a while. These photographs were given to me just a few days ago, but since you yourself had already told me about your affair, I had no interest in these photographs. I didn't even look at them, in case you were wondering. I insisted that they be destroyed, and they agreed since they were not interested in your affairs. I started noticing that you had a life that I knew nothing about almost immediately after I started taking my medication back and working with a therapist. You were rarely at home in the evenings, you started dressing differently, playing sports, everything about you became new and different. While discussing this with the doctor, I gradually realized that you had already moved on and found someone else. At first it hurt, but I soon realized that I had gone too far and that you had waited for me too long. I came to my senses too late to save our marriage. I lost you, and I needed to come to terms with it. This was the price I had to pay for my misguided loyalty. As I gained more control over my life, I gave the government everything they wanted and more than they expected. They allowed me to make financial transfers to pay off the mortgage and pay your child's support. I didn't ask for more and didn't need it. I wanted you to have this so you wouldn't worry or have financial difficulties. I hope this is enough. Finally, I know that I scared you away and destroyed our love. I don't blame you for finding solace elsewhere, and I hope you found what you were missing with me. I realized that I had to leave to let you move on with your life. I wish you happiness and prosperity in the future. Please don't blame yourself for what you did. You have no reason to do this. Goodbye, Angelina. Be happy. I still love you as much as I did on our wedding day. I am very sorry that I ruined everything we had, and I hope you can remember our happy moments and think about me without bitterness. By the time you hear this, I will have already left the country and no one knows where I went. I need this for personal reasons. I'm not in danger, but I need to be somewhere where I can't be found. I don't know for how long, perhaps for a very long time. I will keep in touch with Mr. Green from time to time, but he will only be able to contact me at my direction. There is no need to try to convey anything to me through him. He is instructed not to accept anything from you. This is for your benefit, not mine. Try to understand if you can. The recording ended there, and all my worst fears came true. I went into the bedroom and lay down on the bed that my husband and I would no longer share and sobbed until the tears dried up. I lay there until it got dark, and then I just took off my clothes and crawled under the covers. I finally fell asleep and woke up late the next morning. I listened to the disc over and over, trying to find some hint of hope, but there was nothing there. I studied the divorce papers, hoping to find something encouraging in them, but nothing. I was starting to believe that all I could do was accept what my life would look like now, but I couldn't accept it. I started making a plan. First of all, it was clear to me that Al still loved me, even after what I had done. He left because he loved me and wanted to set me free. He didn't know that I didn't love Woody and that I didn't need anyone but him, my Al. I could never love Woody, and I would never marry him or anyone else. Al didn't understand it, and I needed to tell him about it. Besides, I needed to explain to him that it was not his fault. Yes, he made mistakes and did things that hurt our marriage, but he never betrayed me or our relationship. He never sought solace on the side. I was the one who broke my promises to be with him in difficult times. Al did not leave me, even when he was deeply depressed. He was always at home with me. He never asked more of me than I could give, but when he needed me most, I wasn't there. And finally, he needed to know that I didn't blame him for what happened. I did not try to justify my behavior by referring to his condition. I realized that I was looking for opportunities to please Woody, just as I had once happily tried to please Al. It always brought me happiness to make all happy and to see him enjoy himself. I received joy not just from closeness, but from the fact that I could bring him joy. That's what I tried to recreate with Woody to re-experience the joy that comes from being happy with someone you love. I knew it wasn't easy to understand, but it was true. Al would understand if I could only tell him. The next morning, I called Mr. Green and made an appointment with him the next day. I wanted to start with him, even though Al had made it clear that Green would not accept any messages for him. It was okay, I just needed to start somewhere. Then I called Woody and handed in my resignation. I told him this over the phone and said that I would send him a written statement as soon as I could. He tried to dissuade me and offered to meet, but I refused. I told him that it was over between us and that I had the utmost respect for him. He was kind to me and tried to respect my marriage as much as possible, but I myself made it impossible. It wasn't Woody's fault. Finally, I turned to a private investigator named Clive Owens. I had 2 tasks for him, and we met on the same day. I gave him an advance and agreed on an amount that I could afford to pay. He promised to do everything he could within my budget, and I gave him all the information I had. He was pleased and said it gave him a good start. By the end of the day, I felt much better. I began to take steps to save my marriage to the man I loved with all my heart. I wasn't going to give up without a fight. There was almost no chance, but I was ready to do everything possible, and this brought me peace. That evening, I cleaned the house and organized my closets. I threw away everything that reminded me of the last 3 years and kept only things from my old life. I got rid of everything new fashionable underwear, tight pants, a single thong, lacy bras, and perfumes that I bought just to attract Woody. Now I remembered with horror how I bought these things, realizing that this was the first step towards betraying my husband. Al called it cheating, and although at first I thought he was wrong, I have now reconsidered. It really was a betrayal that began with those things that I acquired precisely for this purpose. This realization again plunged me into deep sadness, and I spent the rest of the day in a state of depression. The next morning, when I woke up, I remembered my shame, but I also remembered the upcoming meeting with Green, and this restored my resolve. I made a huge mistake, and I've already paid for it. Okay, let this be in the past. It's time to move on. I spent the morning writing down my thoughts and feelings, my reasons for what I did, my love for my husband, and my promise to wait for his forgiveness while remaining his wife. I collected all this in a letter for him. She sealed it in an envelope addressed to Al. He might never get it or read it, but I had to try. I dressed in my most formal suit and applied light makeup to look businesslike. I was ready to meet Mr. Green. He warmly welcomed me into his office and invited me to sit at his desk rather than in front of his desk. He joined me, asked if I would like something to drink, and when I said no, he sat down opposite me. "Well, Mrs. Bennington, I'm surprised you're back so soon. Is there anything I can help you with?" "Yes, Mr. Green, there is. I want to contact my husband as soon as possible." "But you know that is impossible, Mrs. Bennington. Mr. Bennington has instructed me not to convey any messages from you to him. He said that you know about this from the disc that I gave you." "I know what was on that disc, Mr. Green, but I don't care. You have to understand that I will not sit back and watch my marriage fall apart. I will find him, and if you don't help me, I will find someone who will. It's your right, Mrs. Bennington, but I can't help you. I'm really sorry. I can't do anything for you." So far, the meeting has gone as I expected. I decided to try a different approach and see what happens. In that case, I will use the money Al gives me and hire a lawyer to file a lawsuit against you as my husband's representative. I will contest the divorce. I noticed that I had caught Mr. Green's attention. He thought about my words and seemed to have made some kind of decision. All I can do is notify Mr. Bennington of your position. Honestly, I don't know when I'll be able to do this, because I don't know where he is now. He contacts me himself, not the other way around. If it doesn't suit you, do as you see fit. I expected such an answer, because that's exactly what Al said in his message. I will wait until you can contact him. When you do this, I want you to give him this envelope. Until then, I will agree to the terms, but it will be temporary until I hear an answer. Do we understand each other? Mr. Green stood up and shook my hand. He assured me that he would convey my position to my husband at the first opportunity. He really didn't know when it would happen, and I believed him. I knew all well enough to know he wasn't bluffing. I returned home to my empty home and started calling my friends. I needed to find a job, and the sooner the better. Money wasn't a big issue, but health insurance was. I contacted 3 people I knew from other agencies in the city and arranged 2 interviews in the coming days. I updated my resume and prepared to re-enter the job market. Over the next 3 months, I found a job at a large credit card company in an entry-level position. This suited me. I had a lot of free time and not many responsibilities, and with the money Al sent me, I didn't need much. I worked with 7 other men and women, and we got along well. I became friends with several women, especially one of them, Mary, an older woman who was divorced like me. We shared our stories, as women often do, and Mary was very sympathetic. Her story was much simpler. She and her husband simply fell out of love with each other and, having no children, decided to leave. She kept the house after the divorce and had some savings, so she worked mainly for insurance benefits. She liked to be free. I offered to introduce her to Woody, but she wasn't ready for it. Perhaps it was for the best. I haven't seen him since the day my life collapsed. During this time, Clive continued to search for Al, but instead of an intensive search, he switched to a wider, but less expensive network, as he called it. He was tracking all of Al's credit cards, his social security number, and a few other documents that I gave him, and he said that sooner or later, if Al was in the country, he would find the trail. It didn't cost me too much, and so the search continued. On the second question, he was more confident. He had requests and expected a response for months. Again, it was within my budget, and I was happy with it. Around this time, Mr. Green called and said that he had given my envelope to Al, but there was no answer. He assured me that Al had received the letter, and I thanked him and continued to wait. 2 years passed without much change. I worked my way up the ranks of the company where I worked, and was soon earning enough to consider expanding my search. I thought about hiring another private detective, but mine said that if it was only about money, he would have told me, so I kept waiting. During this time, Mary and I became very close friends and often spent time together outside of work. One day, she invited me to move in with her, since she still had the house in which she lived before the divorce, a 4-room, 2-story house in a very good area. She said she wanted to keep the house, but he was too lonely with her alone. I would have my own bedroom with a bathroom. I said I'd think about it if she would let me pay the rent. I weighed everything and decided to accept her offer. I could sell my little house and never return to a place where every room reminded me of a bygone past. The house was filled with painful memories at the most unexpected moments. It seemed that if I got rid of this house, I could get rid of these ghosts. So I sold the house and moved in with Mary. Mary and I were getting along quite well together, and things seemed to be starting to work out. One day, Clive called me and said that he had information on the second issue that we had agreed on. He said he had prepared a full report, and I could look at it before deciding what to do next. The next day, I came to his office to pick up the report and discuss the results. He said some clues have started to emerge that may indicate that Al is starting to get in touch again. According to Clive, Al had a source of funds that he carefully concealed from the authorities. and perhaps now he was trying to stall for time. I left his office with cautious optimism for the first time in 3 years. That night, I told Mary what I had learned, and she left me alone so I could study the report in peace. It was a full account of my daughter Jennifer, who was almost 30. I haven't seen or spoken to her since she was 18, the day she left. According to the report, she lived in a small trailer in a town 3 hours away. She worked on an assembly line in a small factory and lived with her daughter, a 10-year-old girl. It was reported that Jennifer's husband had died, and she had no permanent men. She was not prosecuted and had no problems with the law during all the years she lived there. The report said she moved into the trailer 5 years ago and has been working at the plant for the same amount of time. Before that, she lived in another state, but there were no problems there either. I reread the report several times to make sure I didn't miss anything. It seemed that Jennifer had finally settled down and was raising my granddaughter alone. She was stable and had no troubles. The report also included the address, phone number, and name of her daughter, Angelina. When I saw this, my heart sank. Jennifer seemed to remember us when her daughter was born. Al and I didn't even know we had a granddaughter. That night, I spoke with Mary, and she encouraged me to contact Jennifer and try to get to know her granddaughter. I wanted to do it myself, but I was afraid. I remembered what Jennifer was like and knew that if meeting her brought the same old pains, it would break my heart. But now I was alone and understood that I had to try. Mary offered to go with me, and we agreed to set off on Saturday morning. According to the report, Jennifer worked the day shift Monday through Friday and had days off. The trip was uneventful, despite my nervousness, and we stopped at a gas station just 3 blocks from her trailer. I walked over to the payphone while Mary held my hand. The phone rang twice, and a young girl answered. "Hello? This is Angie." Out of excitement, I couldn't say anything right away, but I finally found the strength to speak. "Hello, Angie. Is Mom home?" "Yes, at home. Can I find out who is calling?" "Just say it's someone from her past. Maybe she doesn't remember me." I heard the girl cover the microphone with her hand and call her mother. I waited, my anxiety growing with every second. "It's Jenny. Who is it?" "Jennifer, this is your mom. I'm at Temple and would like to meet you." There was silence on the other end of the phone, and my heart sank in my chest. Maybe she won't want to see me, and the trip will be in vain. I felt that if she refused, my heart would break. Seconds passed, and it seemed to me that she would not want to see me. "Sorry, I was just in shock. Of course, I would like to see you and introduce you to Angie. How far are you? How soon can you arrive? Oh, Mom, how I want to see you." My heart jumped and my stomach flipped. "Everything will be all right. I'm only a few blocks away. I can be with you in a couple of minutes. And by the way, my friend is with me. I hope this won't interfere." "Bring her, of course. No problem. Please come quickly." We drove up to her house, and the meeting turned out to be even better than I could have hoped for. Jenny was a completely different person, beautiful, smart, and a wonderful mother to Angie. She became a woman with a sad face and eyes that were mature beyond her years. She had long black hair and dark brown eyes like her father. Angie was almost indescribable tall for her age, beautiful like her mother, but with green eyes and a thick head of red hair that she probably inherited from her father's side. She was very smart and was immensely glad that she had a grandmother. She had always dreamed of a grandmother, and now she had her own. We spent the whole day with them, and they accepted Mary and me without any doubt. I was happy that I found them. We returned home that night, promising to see each other again the following weekend. Later in the week, it was Mary who suggested that we invite Jenny and Angelina to move in with us. I didn't even think about it, but Mary brought it up herself. I asked what Jenny would do about the job, and Mary assured us that we could find her a job closer to us. We could place her in our office where we both worked, since there were vacancies there. I liked the idea and called Jenny the next morning. Jenny listened carefully to the proposal, but did not promise anything until she discussed it with Angelina. She was also worried about the job, but I assured her that I knew someone who could offer her a good job with prospects. She could leave the factory and save money at first by living with us. The schools in our area were better, and that was what ultimately influenced her decision. Without going into details, I will say that Jennifer and Angelina moved in with Mary and me 2 months later. Jenny sold her trailer and most of her things, and Mary and I rented a truck and moved her things to us ourselves. We put them in 2 spare bedrooms and everything worked out great. Jenny and Mary got along great, and Mary simply adored Angelina. It appears that the feeling was mutual. Shortly after they moved, I plucked up the courage to call Woody for the first time in almost 3 years. He was glad to hear from me, and we agreed to meet for lunch. We discussed how our years apart had gone, and I learned that he had not dated anyone seriously and seemed resigned to life as a bachelor. I just smiled and told him that he should not despair. A man with such an appearance as his would definitely meet his fate sooner or later. He didn't answer, but from his look, I realized that he understood everything. Quickly changing the subject, I told him about Jenny and asked if he could find a place for her. He immediately agreed and, moreover, offered to personally train her, as he once taught me. We agreed to meet, and I left him feeling very satisfied. Woody and Jenny met, and she immediately began working for him. After a couple of weeks, Jennifer was excited about her new job, and one call from Woody reassured me that she was doing a good job. Now that she had a stable job with prospects, she could pay her expenses. Mary initially refused to charge her rent, but eventually agreed when Jenny said that otherwise she would be forced to move out. We all started a happy life. During one of our shopping trips, Jenny finally started talking about Woody and our relationship. We took a break in one of the cafes. She said that Woody often talks about me and always with some sadness. She thought he was in love with me. I thought about it and finally told her the whole story about how Al, Woody, and I tried to save our marriage. I told her everything that had accumulated and felt how I felt better. I still hadn't given up hope of finding Al, but I no longer allowed guilt and sadness to rule my life. Still, it was precisely because of that betrayal that my daughter and granddaughter returned to me again. So much good came out of something so bad. Jenny was very attentive while I told my story. She listened intently as I talked about my problems with Al, his depression, and how I stayed with him all this time, but ultimately failed to support him when he needed it most. I told her about that night with Woody, but made it clear that it was not his fault. He remained a loyal friend and never showed interest in me after I was honest about my feelings. She listened to everything and then sat down next to me and hugged me. I couldn't hold back my tears and cried on her shoulder. I often cried when I remembered my past life. That day brought Jennifer and I closer than ever, and we finally became real mother and daughter. I thank God that I found her and Angie. I had no idea what I was missing until I found them again. Time passed, and Jennifer received several promotions to senior account manager. She now earned enough to cover her expenses living with us and Mary. I decided some time ago to approach Mr. Green again and arrange to open a trust fund in Angelina's name. I transferred all the alimony assistance that Al sent to this account and added the proceeds from the sale of the house there. By the time Angeli becomes an adult, she will have funds for her education. That's all I could do for her. Al and I had never been able to give it to Jenny, and now it was a long-awaited solution. Jenny had tears in her eyes when I told her about the trust fund. It's been a little over 4 years since Al left. My daughter, granddaughter, and I have built a good life for ourselves. We were still living with Mary because every time we talked about moving, she literally rebelled against the idea. We stayed with her out of gratitude and affection. She gave us unconditional love and friendship. It was a perfect coexistence that made my life better, and I knew it brought happiness to Angie and Jenny. Everything went on until that dark rainy Monday came that I will never forget. Angie, can you find Jenny so we can all talk? Mary had just returned to the kitchen after finishing some work in the office while Angie and I were doing the dishes after dinner. Jenny did the laundry and ironed Angie's clothes for school. Certainly. Angie, go find your mom. I think she's in the laundry room. Angie left, and I turned to Mary. What's happening? I know this tone. You have news for us, and it seems to me that it is not pleasant. No, nothing good. But I wish we could all be there when I say so. Do you mind? Do as you see fit. You know that I love you and will always love you, no matter what happens. I waited as the girls came in and sat down at our kitchen table, where we had spent so many wonderful moments together as friends and family. We all watched as Mary gathered her courage to tell us her news. This morning, my doctor gave me a diagnosis for a problem I was having. I didn't tell you much because I didn't want to worry you too much, but I knew it could be serious, so I got tested a week ago. He called today. I have pancreatic cancer. The disease is already at an advanced stage, and the doctor believes that I have about 6 months left. Here's the news. This is how our wonderful little universe began to crumble. Jenny and I looked at each other, and tears sparkled in our eyes. Angie jumped up and ran out of the room to deal with her grief in her own way, the way little girls do. She'll come back when she's done with it. Jenny and I were less fortunate. We knew that the real world had come for us and caught up with us. From now on, our lives will be dedicated to making Mary comfortable and happy. There was nothing to discuss. We knew it and told Mary. She tried to object, but not too forcefully. The three of us talked until late at night, discussing everything related to care, medications, nutrition, and final wishes. This was a difficult conversation, but a necessary one, and we were going to stick it out. Mary was the strongest of the three of us, perhaps because she had time to come to terms with her diagnosis. We had to catch up with her. Angie went to bed and never came back that night, but she could handle it. Over time, the disease weakened Mary more and more. Jenny and I hired a babysitter to watch Mary during the day while we were at work and Angie was at school. Mary became increasingly less able to be independent and required constant care. Sometimes the morphine would completely debilitate her, and then she would depend on Jenny and me. We took turns caring for her in the evenings and on weekends. Her condition worsened until one day she asked me to sit next to her. She had important words for me. I want you to know how happy I was that you lived here with me. These were the happiest days of my life after Paul and I got divorced. You were a real gift to me. When we found Jennifer and Angelina, I became even happier. Your daughter and granddaughter are a miracle, and I thank God every night. I didn't have children of my own, so Angie was special to me. I didn't say anything, but squeezed her hand and smiled. I felt the same way and told her about it more than once. There was no need to repeat it. I left you everything in my will. Paul died, I have no other loved ones, and you have become the most important person in my life. So everything is yours now. You can continue to live here, and Jenny and Angie can stay with you as long as they want. I know you don't need anything from me, but I want you to have this. I was so overcome with emotion that I could not speak, but Mary saw it in my eyes. She simply squeezed my hand and, exhausted, closed her eyes. I stayed with her, held her hand and wet her face with cool water to ease her suffering. Just a week later, Mary passed away. She passed away in her sleep, and I hope it happened peacefully. I found her in the morning, and Jenny and I hugged each other, trying to cope with grief. I called work to say that I was taking time off to organize a funeral. According to Mary's last will, she wanted to be buried in the cemetery next to her parents' graves. I contacted the funeral home, and they took care of all the details. We scheduled a memorial service for Friday, and I was pleased that many people came to it, both for the farewell and for the ceremony itself. Mary had many friends, most of whom I knew, but some I didn't know. Everyone mourned the loss of a faithful friend. Angie took the loss much harder than I expected. I think this is due to the fact that Mary became almost like a grandmother to her, whom she never knew, and also replaced her father. He died while he was serving, and he never got to see her. Mary became her great-grandmother, as she called her. Angie spent a lot of time with Mary, cared for her, and in her last days almost never left her side. As the guests began to leave for shelter from the continuing rain, I stayed close to Angie and Jenny. We all didn't want to leave. It seemed that farewell would not be final as long as we could touch her coffin. Finally, Jenny walked up to the casket with Angie to say goodbye. Angie placed a small rose on the coffin and blew a kiss. Jenny smiled at her, turned to me and said, "We'll wait for you when you're ready." He and Angie headed to the limousine, and I stayed behind. I stood there silently, looking at the shiny bronze coffin that Mary had chosen herself. The cemetery employees were waiting for my permission to lower him into the grave. I nodded and watched as he slowly disappeared into the cold ground. They removed the belts and winch, leaving me alone with this last-minute goodbye. That's how I stood now, with the rain drizzling down on me, and with the knowledge that my best friend was no longer there. I wiped my tears and tried to return to this gray, wet world where Mary was no longer there. After waving to the employees and thanking them, I headed towards my family. Life went on as usual. All property, as Mary bequeathed, passed to me, and the inheritance was formalized without any problems. I was able to take care of all her obligations, and Jenny, Angie, and I continued to live in the house that had long since become a real home for us. We lived like this for about 6 months, until one day Jenny asked me if the two of us could go somewhere to talk. I agreed, realizing that she had something important to tell me. Since Jenny came back into my life, she has proven herself to be a reliable and self-sufficient woman who has worked hard to provide for her daughter's future. She often recalled her careless past, when with her actions she ruined Al's and my lives before leaving. Jenny told me her story as if it had not happened to her about wild parties, life on the streets, drugs, and promiscuity. She never made excuses and apologized for everything she did, for cheating, stealing, and lying. Al and I knew everything then, but we couldn't help her. She left, and we realized we had lost her. But now he was a completely different person. She coped, survived, and met a wonderful man whom she loved so much that she wanted to change her life. She received her certificate, got a job, and they began to build a life together. She was 3 months pregnant when he was called into service. He left voluntarily, considering it his duty, and Jenny accompanied him with pride. But her pride turned to grief when 4 months later she learned that he had died. She went into premature labor that same day, and Angelina was born 6 weeks premature. She was weak and barely survived at first, but soon began to grow and became stronger. We went to a small park where we sometimes had picnics. The day was clear and sunny, and we walked slowly along the forest paths until we came to a bench near a stream. Jenny sat down and motioned for me to sit next to her. I sat down and took her hand, letting her know that I was ready to listen to whatever she had to say. "Mom, I want to ask you one question, and please answer me honestly." "Fine. Of course, you can ask or tell me anything. I want what's best for you and Angie, and will do everything I can to help. Say what's in your heart." "I think I'm in love with Woody. Before you say anything, I want to make it clear that he and I had nothing but a few friendly dates for lunch or dinner, but now he has officially asked me out. I'd like to know what you think about this. Do you have feelings for him, and do you want him to be with you? If so, I will step aside without any offense. But I really like it, and I would like to see what can come of it. Everything depends on you." To be honest, I was a little stunned. I knew that Woody had taken Jenny under his wing, training her and supporting her as she settled into her new job. I knew what kind of person he was, and I was sure there was nothing shameful or secretive about it. Woody saw in Jenny what I saw, and he was the man who could offer her a stable life. At first I hesitated. He was more than 20 years older than her. I knew that he was full of energy and strength, but I saw no reason to deny her this. I think Woody is a wonderful person, and I have no feelings for him other than friendship. If you think he could be your life partner, I say go for it. You know what I think of him, and I know he will be a wonderful husband and stepfather to Angie. By the way, does Angie know about him? Angie adores him. We've all met together more than once just as friends, but she really thinks he's special. This is what attracted me to him, and what you told me about him before. I want to say yes to him and see what happens. Thanks for approving this. This has been bothering me for a long time, and I was afraid that you still had feelings for him. Go ahead, daughter, and be happy. You deserve it. and she made up her mind. Jenny and Woody became a couple, and it was nice to see her so happy. Angie was also happy. She began to call Woody almost Dad. She never had a real father, and besides Mary and me, she knew no other adults, so the appearance of Woody was a real gift for her, especially considering the kind of person he was. They dated for almost a year before he finally proposed to her. First, he came to me and asked for my blessing, and I could not hold back my tears. Woody hugged me and let me cry until I finally wiped my tears away and gave my blessing. That same day, he proposed to Jenny, and she accepted. I started planning the wedding, and we chose a date for mid-June. It was supposed to be a small ceremony since Jenny and Woody wanted to keep it low-key. We put together a guest list, and it ended up being 30 people. We were up to our ears in worries, and despite the work, we managed amazingly. There was only one problem we couldn't solve: who would walk Jenny down the aisle. As the mother of the bride, I couldn't do this. Mary would have been ideal, but she was no longer with us. Jenny and I discussed this issue for weeks, but we could not come to a common decision. This gave me an idea. It's been almost 5 years since I last saw or heard from Al. All I knew was that he received my letter about 4 years ago, but never responded. Mr. Green stayed in touch with him, but we haven't spoken since I asked him to set up a trust for Angie. I decided to call him the next morning. I also called Clive, our detective, and told him that I was trying to find Al to invite him to the wedding. I wasn't sure if Al knew about Jenny, Mary, and Angie, but I wanted to at least try. I asked Clive to see if he had any contacts or information about Al's whereabouts. He listened carefully to me and then proposed a rather unusual plan. Clive said that if I did what he asked, he had a chance to finally find my husband. My ex-husband, to be exact. I had long ago signed the divorce papers when Mr. Green said he had given my letter to Al, but he refused to answer. Then I realized that it was all over. I listened carefully to Clive and finally agreed to do as he suggested. The next morning I went to Henry Green's office and asked him for some time to talk. His secretary said she could find time for me in the afternoon, so I decided to spend a few hours shopping for the upcoming wedding. I had lunch at a little cafe that Woody and I had been to a few times, and it brought back mixed memories. During tea, I called Jennifer to discuss which photographer to choose and a few other minor details until it was time to meet Mr. Green. The office looked the same as it did 5 years ago when I first met Henry Green. Now we were on first-name terms and just talked about life for a while before I moved on to the purpose of my visit. Henry, as you know, my daughter Jennifer is getting married soon. We are almost ready for the wedding and everything is going according to plan. By the way, you're invited if you want to come. Anyway, we have one problem: who will walk Jenny down the aisle? The only people who could do this are either already dead or participating in the ceremony themselves, so there is no one else to ask. And here's what I'd like to ask of you. Tell Al that I want him to walk Jennifer down the aisle on her big day. Henry looked like I hit him with something hard. His face showed shock, and I even found this reaction a little funny. He tried to say something several times, but in the end, he just sat back and looked at me carefully. Say something, Henry. You look funny sitting there with such a stupid expression on your face. This is just a request, and for him it will not be anything supernatural except as a duty to his daughter and granddaughter. He may still hate me, and I don't blame him for that, but he shouldn't take his feelings out on Jenny. Just ask him. That's all I ask. I stood up, freeing Henry from having to answer. After shaking his hand, I headed towards the exit. By the way, I'll make sure you get an invitation. Hope to see you there. Goodbye, Henry. I quickly left the office and headed to the car. After getting behind the wheel and closing the door, I called Clive and told him that I had just spoken with Henry and asked him to tell Al my request. Clive listened to me carefully and asked me to wait. He promised to call back as soon as he had some information. There was excitement in his voice, and this gave me hope that this time he could help me. Even though I no longer had any expectations for myself, I still wanted Al to know his granddaughter, and I truly wanted him to walk our daughter down the aisle. She had achieved so much, and it would have been a tragedy if Al hadn't seen her that day. I prayed that Clive would find something. I returned home and Angie, and I spent the next few days getting ready while Jenny and Woody made plans for their honeymoon and choosing a new home for their family after the wedding. Angie had mixed feelings about moving because she was so used to our home, but I assured her that I would always be there for her and she could come see me whenever she wanted. This calmed her down, and soon she was looking forward to a new life. We were all happy, but I was still waiting for news about the search. A week after I called Clive, he called me back. It was obvious that he was worried, and he asked me to come to his office as soon as possible. I asked what he found, but he refused to talk on the phone. I agreed to come the same day. Before going to see him, I called Henry Green and asked if he had been able to contact Al, but he said no. I thanked him and hung up, not understanding what that meant. When I arrived at Clive's office, his secretary greeted me warmly with a big smile. Over the past few years, I have become almost a regular customer with them, and besides, I paid Clive a considerable amount, which perhaps explained their joy. Come in, come in. I have great news for you. I think you'll like it." Clive was overjoyed, and a contented smile lit up his face. He waited until I sat down and, running out from behind the table, handed me a piece of paper. It had a name and address neatly printed on it. I looked at him in confusion because I did not know his name and address. I looked up at Clive, waiting for an explanation. "That's all. That's the name he lives under now, and he's only 15 minutes away from you. He has been living here for 3 months. He had previously been in South America and returned to the US only 3 months ago using false documents and a passport. Apparently, he managed to enter the country without attracting the attention of the authorities. All this time I suspected that he had hidden means, and he returned as soon as he was sure that the danger had passed." "But how did you find him under a false name?" I asked in surprise. "When you contacted Henry Green, he sent all a message by courier. I knew from someone who worked in his office that this was the only way Henry kept in touch with Al. No phone or mail, only couriers. I sat there and watched. The courier delivered the message to the mailbox, etc. Branch, and I had to wait more than 10 hours, but it was worth it. I saw Al himself take the note. I recognized him from the photographs you gave me. I followed him to his house and found out the license plate number of his car. I found out through the DMV that this was his name. Now I have an address, a phone number, and a photo of him." Clive was beaming like a child, and I didn't care how excited he looked. Tears filled my eyes, and I stood up to hug him. He happily returned my hug, and his secretary, watching us, also shed tears. We all stood there smiling and exchanging joy. When I left the office, I still didn't know what I was going to do, but I decided to talk it over with Jenny, Woody, and maybe Angie first. I needed to digest all this, and I decided to postpone the decision until tomorrow. The next morning at breakfast, Jenny and Angie noticed that I was in high spirits. Apparently, I couldn't hide my joy at finally finding Al. I decided to tell them the truth and find out what they thought about it. I told them everything I found out. Jenny and Angie were stunned and speechless for a moment. Jenny spoke first. "Mom, you need to meet him. Of course, I really want him to take me to the altar, but first you have to see him alone, just the two of you. Do it for yourself. Fine?" She smiled softly, and in that moment I realized again how lucky I was that we had found each other and that she was back in my life. "Grandma, you must go to him. You have to tell him to come back. I so want to meet him and have my own grandfather. Please tell him this. Please." "Okay, for the sake of both of you, I'll go to him tomorrow. I'll tell him what he's missing, that 2 beautiful ladies are waiting for him here, dreaming of seeing him. If he's a real man, this will work, don't you think?" We all laughed and cried together, as women do, and enjoyed every minute. But inside me, everything was burning with excitement. Meeting him again was such a hassle for me that everything in my stomach seemed to be turning over and burning. I tried to distract myself, to get rid of these thoughts at least for a while. I could think about what I would tell him later when I was alone. I was terrified, but excited at the same time. I had lived without him for so long that I thought I could handle his refusal to come to the wedding. But I didn't know if I could bear his refusal to meet with me. If he refused to see or talk to me, I had no idea what I would do. One day the day flew by, and at night I went to bed, so excited that I doubted whether I would be able to sleep at all. I took a long, hot bath, relaxed until my skin began to wrinkle, then dried myself off, wrapped myself in a soft terry robe, and lay in bed, trying to read for a while. It didn't work. I read the same page 6 times before I gave up and turned off the light. I remembered how our life turned out with Al, both good and bad times. We went through a lot, but we always tried to move forward as one team, building a common life. Why did I destroy it? Why did she finally give in to the temptation to spend that night with Woody? I thought back to that time and realized that although Al had fallen into a deep depression and actually passed away, I remained by his side until that very night. I remembered that night so well. It was a beautiful, warm night, so pleasant, and we had just seen a romantic play. I was filled with love and wanted to give it to someone. The person I wanted to give it to was no longer around, so I turned to someone who was available. I just wanted to give that pleasure that would make me feel like a woman. Only this. It was not love. There was no real intimacy. It was just a desire to give joy. I wondered if I would ever be able to explain to Al why I did what I did that night. I tried to put it into words in the letter I sent him, but it didn't seem to mean anything to him. I thought about it a little more, but realized that I didn't know any other way to explain it. I loved Al with all my heart and soul, but when I needed him so much, he was not there. He could say the same about me. When he needed me, I wasn't there. How can this be the basis for reconciliation? This is wrong. With this thought, I finally fell into an exhausting sleep. The morning was almost unbearable. I was so stressed out that I would do the same things several times before I realized what I was doing. I took the day off, I had no schedule, and I rationalized everything without noticing that I was being illogical. Finally, I went upstairs to get dressed and get ready for the meeting. I couldn't put it off any longer. I put on my best dress light, flowing, leaving my tanned arms and shoulders open and emphasizing my appearance. I loved the hint of cleavage and open back. I put on my pearl necklace and earrings and took a step back to evaluate myself. I was irritated by my hair and spent the next 20 minutes styling it until I finally left it hanging loosely over my shoulders. The blonde highlights added style to my dark hair, and I ultimately decided to leave it as is. Ready or not, it's time. Half an hour later, I stopped in front of a small house with a small garden, a tiny lawn, and a short path leading to the garage. Modest housing this would never have suited the old Al. I sat looking at the house, working up the courage to go to the door. Finally, I gathered all my determination and went to the entrance. She paused again, mentally encouraging herself, and finally knocked 3 times. I was about to knock again when the door opened, and he was standing in front of me. It was really him. Until the last moment I doubted, but he was in front of me. A little grayer, much thinner, but that was him. It had been 5 years, 3 months and 21 days since he left for the interview. It had been so long since I last talked to him, touched him, or heard his voice. But it was him, standing here and looking at me. Hello, Elle. How have you been? It's stupid and banal, but it was the first thing that came to my mind. So much for preparation. Hello, Angie. You look absolutely beautiful. Over the years, you become more and more beautiful. May I ask how you found me? It doesn't matter. The main thing is that I found it. I was looking for you to ask you a question. Can I ask a question? Certainly. But I think I know what you want to ask. He fell silent and walked away from the door. Please come in first. There's not much space here, but it's home to me. Do you want anything? Coffee, something non-alcoholic. I crossed the threshold and found myself in a small foyer. Looking around, I was surprised by its ascetic atmosphere. If this was his home, he was truly unassuming. No, thank you. You've got ... interesting comma, I think, is the right word. But thanks anyway. You're just being polite. Well, about your question, is it about the wedding? Yes, about her. In general, it's not surprising that you know about her. It's all over the papers, and Henry probably told you to. You'd be surprised how much I know about you. Just because I left doesn't mean I stopped caring about you. I have followed your successes, failures, and losses over the years. I knew about Mary and was happy for you then. I was glad that you found someone to share your life with. I was surprised, but glad. Oh, so you thought Mary was my mistress? How funny. No, Mary and I were only friends. We shared lives, but not our personal lives. Both had experienced painful relationships with men and were content to live without them. Sorry. Apparently, I didn't know as much as I thought. What about Jennifer and Angelina? How did this happen? I've hired a private investigator to find you both. Ever since I lost you, I've wanted to try to get our family back, and they've been a part of it. They found her first. I called, and Mary and I visited her, and we saw her as a wonderful person with a wonderful child. We asked her to move in with us, and she agreed. It was a great time for all of us. I haven't been as happy as I was at that moment for a long time. Either way, happier than at any time since you left. It's hard to believe that my leaving upset you. I knew I had to give you freedom. I was glad that you found someone who would make you happy. I've let you down for too long, and my actions have been disgusting. I was ashamed and disgusted with myself and unworthy of being with anyone. That's why I left. When you found another man, I only wished you happiness. I left thinking this was the best gift I could give you. A gift of love, believe it or not. I believe you thought so, but it wasn't true. I have never loved any man as much as I loved you. I didn't love Woody, the man I was with that night. I was without you for so long that I just wanted to give you the pleasure that I always gave, but you weren't there. I thought about you, but turned to someone else. It was a weakness on my part, not a loss of love or desire to be with someone else. It was because I wanted you. My biggest sin is that I didn't even notice the changes that began a few weeks before that night. I was so caught up in my search for happiness that I missed the return of the man I loved. He was there, but I was so selfish that I didn't see him. When I realized, it was already too late. I tried to explain to you, but you didn't want to listen. You've already decided that I want someone else. You didn't let me tell you how I felt. You didn't believe me when I wrote to you and tried to express it as best as possible. Nothing could reach you, and then I realized that I had lost you. I realized that I drove you away, and you no longer care about me enough to hear me. You didn't drive me away, and I never blamed you for your betrayal. I knew what I did to you and our marriage. I could end this terrible time at any moment. The prosecutors gave me the opportunity to tell them what they wanted to know, but I chose silence, protecting others at the cost of our marriage. I let it continue and lost all of our money and house, all because of a misguided sense of loyalty. I was so wrong, so stupid. It was I who drove you away, not you who drove me away. You were faithful to me until the end. Most women would have left long before you finally gave in. I don't believe you intentionally betrayed our marriage. You tried to find a little joy in the darkness I drove us into. You tried to reach me, but I closed myself off, relying only on myself and neglecting you. I never stopped loving you, but most of all I hated myself. Al spoke firmly and calmly. It was obvious that he had thought a lot about this, and I felt a small spark of hope rise within me. I wanted to continue the conversation, but I thought Jennifer's wedding should come first. Then I asked the question I came with. Let's leave you and me aside for now, and I'll ask the question I came with. Will you give Jennifer your hand at her wedding to Haywood Meissner? She and your granddaughter want you to be there, and Jenny especially wants you to entrust her hand to the man she loves. Al looked at me in surprise, mulling over my words. He understood what I wanted from him, but I didn't know if he knew who this man was that his daughter was marrying. I waited while he considered the information he had received. The same Woody. Yes, the same one. He is a wonderful person, kind and considerate, and he was devastated when he thought he had ruined my marriage. I had to try hard to convince him that it wasn't his fault, but whatever you think, he and I were never together again after that night. It was my decision, and he accepted it. It wasn't until he met Jennifer and asked me for her hand that we saw each other again. At that moment, he was so in love with her, as she was with him, that he did not see anyone around except her. I'm amazed. I guess I didn't pay attention to his name. But isn't he too old for her? It seems like they are several years apart. Age doesn't matter to both of them. And Angie adores him. They are a great family, and I am very happy for all three of them. But you haven't answered my question yet. Will you give her a hand? Yes, of course, I would be honored to give her in marriage. I have my doubts about who she will marry, but since she asked me about it, I will do it. I want to meet her and meet my granddaughter as soon as possible. Now that you told me this, I can't wait any longer. Then he stopped and looked carefully into my eyes. He reached out his hands and placed them on my shoulders, holding them at arm's length. From his touch, I felt a chill run through my body. I wanted so badly to take his hands and pull him towards me, but I restrained myself. You must understand how I feel about this. It will be hard for me to come to terms with Jenny's choice. This man has not proven to me that he is a decent man. He betrayed me when he was with you. He knew you were married, but he ignored it. I just can't help but think about what he'll do when he's married to our Jenny. What if he finds someone else he likes or who is vulnerable? What then? I was stunned by Al's words. It didn't look like Woody in my eyes. Woody was an honest man, and it was I who led him down the wrong path. It was my fault, not his. I told Al this, but he just shook his head sadly as he listened to me. In any novel, there are two people involved. He invited you to meetings several times and was willing to spend time with you, even though he knew you were married. He knew that when you are with him, you are not at home with your husband. Despite all the problems in our marriage, he had to respect it. You said he invited you home that night, didn't you? Isn't that right? Yes, that's true, but I agreed myself. I was married, and I had to say no. It's my fault, can't you see? No, I don't see. Why did he invite a married woman to his home just to spend the night with her? Explain to me why it was permissible for him to offer this, but for you it was impossible to accept. I was starting to get confused and didn't know how to explain to Al that Woody was a decent person and that it was my fault. I tried to explain again, but he simply refused to hear me. He continued to claim that Woody was also to blame. I tried to convince him again, but then he asked me another question. Didn't he say he loved you? I think you told me this yourself. If he loved you, why did he switch to Jenny so easily? I have no reason to believe that he may have other motives. Maybe it's just in my head, but I will always have doubts about him, and I may never be able to accept him as my son-in-law. What about Jenny? She loves him so much. I believe that he loves her too. What will you tell her? I won't tell Jenny anything. This is her life, and I have no right to question her choices. According to you, she is a strong woman and knows what she wants. She's been married before, so she understands what to expect. Thank you for this. She would be heartbroken if you voiced your concerns. I believe you're wrong about Woody, but that's up to you. I'm grateful that you will still be there for Jenny and Angie and won't discourage her or fill her with doubt. Now I'd like to come meet Jenny and Angie and get to know them better before the wedding. Will this be acceptable to you and to them? Certainly. I spent so much time and money to find you, and now you ask if you can come to my house. Please come now. They will be so happy to see you, and you will fulfill Angie's dream of meeting her grandfather. I would really like this, but I think it's better to wait until tomorrow. I want to prepare for the meeting. I want to pick out a gift for Angie and something for Jennifer. I'll also be able to dress a little better. You took me by surprise, I admit. I thought about his words, and before I could stop myself, I blurted out. But will you really come? Last time we broke up, you were leaving for an interview. This was more than 5 years ago. Will it all happen again? What will Angie tell me if you disappear again? He smiled at me and gently touched my face. It was a mistake. I should have done something different, and I won't do it again. I'll definitely come. How about 10 in the morning? Tomorrow is Saturday, no school, no work. I agreed, and we talked a little more. But I was so excited about Angie meeting all that I completely forgot about his doubts and worries about Woody. All I thought about was that my family would be together again at the wedding. Happy times deserve it. I couldn't sit still from excitement and finally decided it was time to leave. Reminding him of the meeting tomorrow, I left and he walked me to the door. I'm glad you found me, Angie. I missed you more than I realized. I can't wait to see you tomorrow. Goodbye, Elle. I can't wait either. Please don't disappoint me again. With these words, I ran out to the car and headed home to tell the news to my daughter and granddaughter. I hardly noticed the road as I drove back. In the evening, telling Angie and Jenny about what awaited them tomorrow, I saw their sincere delight. Jenny had memories that allowed her to imagine how things would be, but Angie had nothing. It seems like Jenny never really talked to her daughter about Al and me, and she didn't have any photos of her either. She wanted to reconnect, but always felt too guilty, so she decided to start a new life on her own. All Angie knew was that she would finally meet her grandfather. The next morning, Saturday, we all got up very early. Jenny and I were cleaning the house, trying to make it perfect to quell our anxiety. I understood that Jenny would be the center of attention during this visit, and I was determined not to disturb them. This day was primarily for her, and I wanted her meeting with her father to be perfect. Angie, on the other hand, was surprisingly calm and collected. I think she decided she needed to act like an adult. It looked touching and a little sad at the same time. But I knew that this calm would disappear as soon as Al entered the house. The only tense moment came when Jenny asked if Woody should be invited. I replied that perhaps this time it would be better if they met without him. Jenny agreed without further questions. Around 9:30, the phone rang. It was Al who asked if he could come over now. I said yes, and he promised to be there in 20 minutes. After hanging up, I immediately alerted Jenny and Angie, and we all sat there, tensely waiting. I was waiting for my husband, whom I myself had pushed away almost 5 years ago when I made a mistake. Jenny was waiting for her father, whom she had not seen for more than 20 years. Angie was waiting for a grandfather she had never met. 3 women were expecting 3 different men. When the doorbell rang, Angie ran to answer it. Jenny and I stood frozen in our seats, listening to the sounds of their first meeting. It was so quiet that I couldn't stand it and headed into the corridor to see them. Al stood holding Angie tightly as they both cried quietly. I just stood there watching them and then motioned for Jenny to come closer. We both looked at this picture. Tears also sparkled in our eyes. It was a sight I will never forget. Al finally set Angie down and she took a step back, looking up at him. Then she took his hand again and pulled him down the corridor towards us. We were still standing when Al saw me and Jenny. He smiled and let Angie lead him further. She finally turned to us and ran to her mother. "Look, Mom, this is Grandpa. Look at him. He's just wonderful. You can kiss him too." Angie grabbed Jenny's hand and pulled her towards Al, and he opened his arms to embrace her. She merged with him in her arms as if there was no time between them. It was too much for me, and I went into the kitchen to sit alone. I had more than I ever hoped for. My daughter and granddaughter were with her father and grandfather again. Al came back into my life, but I didn't yet know what my life would be like now. Time will show. Al and the girls spent time together talking, laughing, and just getting to know each other again. Woody came over later that evening and Al was very nice to him. They shook hands and exchanged a few pleasantries, but it was clear that Al remained cold and doubtful. It was obvious to me, but Jenny didn't notice. Eventually, it was Woody who came into my kitchen and asked me what the problem was. I explained Al's doubts to him and conveyed to him exactly that Al was really worried. Gradually, I myself began to understand his point of view and directly told Woody that Al was right about something. Woody was upset, but I told him not to think about it now, but to think about it and find an answer that could convince both Al and me. I don't know what exactly Woody said to Al, but I soon noticed that Al began to make an effort to improve his relationship with him. Woody didn't share their conversation with me, but it didn't matter to me as long as Al was confident in him. The wedding took place in a large church that Mary and I had attended for many years. The abbot was delighted to perform the ceremony and remembered Mary fondly. She also got married in this church long before his arrival, but he knew her and her husband well. Al met him at rehearsal, and Jenny and Angie were there too. Everything was ready for the wedding, and the reception was held in a large hall nearby. We shortened the guest list as Jenny preferred, so there was room for everyone. The wedding was wonderful, and Al and I were thrilled to see our only daughter finally find happiness. She has come a long way from the difficult teenager who caused us so much trouble. She wore a white wedding dress and Angie was the flower girl. I couldn't take my eyes off Jenny in her wedding dress, and my heart swelled with pride for her and Angie. I watched Woody and his friend walk up the altar and waited anxiously for the sound of familiar music. Everyone turned around as Jenny walked down the aisle, followed by Al. I couldn't take my eyes off Al, walking next to her, proud and confident. As they approached the altar, I heard him say words that made my heart ache. Her mother and I. Her mother and I. These simple words sounded like music. Al came and sat next to me, holding my hand tightly as the ceremony continued. We watched with pride as the priest said them to husband and wife. We stood as they walked down the aisle together and out of the church. Now they were married, they were a new family, and I had a strange feeling of sadness. I had just regained my daughter and granddaughter, but now they were leaving to live with a new husband and father. I will miss them very much. Even though Woody bought a house just 10 minutes away, life will never be the same. They will begin a new life, which I will no longer be a part of, and it was hard. But I wanted them to be happy, and they were happy. The reception was fun, noisy, and, fortunately, fast. Woody and Jenny were going to Florida for their honeymoon, and they insisted that Angie go with them. I offered to leave her with me, but they both refused. Woody wanted Angie to go with them, and Jenny agreed. They were leaving straight from the reception, their belongings already packed and loaded into the car. Woody planned to leave the car in the airport parking lot until they returned. We could only wave after them, showering them with rice and blessings. As their car disappeared from sight, Al turned to me with a wide smile. Everything went great. They really looked happy together, and Angie was thrilled to be the flower bearer and couldn't wait to go to Disney World. I'll admit, I still don't fully trust Woody. He seems like a decent man and a gentleman, and I hope he will become a good husband and father. I just want him to not make that mistake again. I agree, but I still think Woody is a good choice, and I'm glad you accepted it. I'm glad I once suggested that he take Jenny to work. He agreed to take care of her and train her, just as he once helped me. He was so sweet when he came to me to ask for her hand in marriage. If you could see that, you'd understand how much he loves her and Angie. I'm so glad they found each other. I'm sure you won't regret it. Well, maybe I should take you home? I know that you came with one of your friends, and I just have a car. That would be wonderful. I really need to go home and want to get rid of these outfits. My feet are falling off from the heels. I want to wear jeans and comfortable shoes. Take me home, James. We drove in complete silence. Each of us was immersed in our own thoughts about the ceremony. The silence was comfortable and time flew by. When all pulled up to my house, I invited him to stop by for a cup of coffee. He hesitated, but agreed. We entered a quiet, empty house. I already missed my daughter and granddaughter. Sit down and relax. I'll put the water on and then go change. Can you watch the kettle while I change? No problem. I also want to sit for a while and recover. I went upstairs and changed into tight jeans that fit perfectly and a light pink top. I lost all the excess weight by exercising and dieting and maintained a good figure by doing aerobics. I looked at myself in the mirror and was pleased with the result. In my 50s, I looked quite good. I had a slim figure and toned breasts. It was a good first step towards getting my man back. I put on my soft shoes and went down to Al. Al was pouring coffee when I walked into the kitchen. He finished pouring and looked at me. Wow, you look amazing. I can't remember when you looked better than you do now. This was many years ago. You are still one of the most beautiful women I have ever seen. Oh, well, thank you, sir. Flattery will definitely help you. But I appreciate it. I worked hard to look like this. We talked for an hour, discussing everything and nothing in particular. We talked about Jenny and Angie, about their new life, discussed the reception, and those guests that neither of us knew. We remembered with surprise what Jenny was like before and what she became now. We knew we had built a strong foundation for her, and were glad it helped her when she decided to change. She came through all the difficulties successfully, and we felt that we had done our part. It was a good feeling. Feeling the relaxed and calm atmosphere, I decided to take advantage of the moment. Al, what will happen to us now? I once wrote you a letter in which I tried to explain my actions. I don't know if you read it because you didn't answer, but everything I said in that letter remains true. I never stopped loving you, and I never wanted anyone else. That night with Woody, I kept thinking about you, how much you loved what I did for you, and how you responded to it. I missed what you did for me, and I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I couldn't stop thinking about you. Afterwards, I realized that it was a mistake, because he was not you. It wasn't the same. I even thought then that only you could understand what I was talking about. Since you left, I haven't had anyone, and I haven't even gone on dates. I told Woody that same night that I told you about us, that nothing would ever happen between us again, and that it was my fault that I let it happen. He was depressed because he hurt you with his actions. I told him it was my fault, but he didn't want to believe it. He was so decent that he sincerely worried about you and me. I fell silent, carefully watching his reaction. I couldn't understand how he felt. He didn't say anything, so I continued. I quit the bank for obvious reasons after you left and found another job, where I met Mary. We became best friends. She got divorced, as did I, and we finally decided to move in together. I wrote you this letter and contacted Henry Green shortly after you left me. I don't know if he told you about this, but I threatened to sue him. I also hired Clive Owens and asked him to find you and Jennifer. I had enough information, and he tried, honestly tried, but as he put it, you went deep underground. He set up a net that would remain in place, waiting for you to surface again. But in the meantime, he found Jenny, and you know the rest. I didn't tell you, but I put all the child support you paid me into a trust fund for Angie. I also added the proceeds from the sale of our old house. I thought you would approve. So, I need to know where we go from here. I still love you and want you to come back to me. I'm really sorry that I hurt you, and I hope you can forgive me. I don't know what else to say except that I have lived every day since you left, so that you can be proud of me and trust me again. Here. I finally said what I wanted to say since the day he left me. I told him everything that was in my soul. I bared my soul to him. I gave him my hopes and my destiny. I placed my future in his hands. I looked at his face and waited for what he would say. Angie, you know I never stopped loving you, and I'm glad you still love me. But now everything is different than it was. I don't know how to explain other than just saying it. First of all, I have a daughter named Consuela. She is only 7 years old and lives in Brazil. I lived there under the name Angelina, Alberto Angelina. It's funny, isn't it? I took your last name as my new one. I married her mother, Bettina, a year after I left you. I didn't love her, but she was kind to me. She needed a husband to take care of her and her daughter, so we came to an agreement. I married her and adopted Consuela. Now she is truly my daughter. I was shocked and saddened. I lost him without even knowing it. I turned away as tears began to fill my eyes. I couldn't speak, and he finally continued. Bettina and I lived together in Sao Paulo, a city on the coast of Brazil, and I worked there as a mechanical engineer. The locals called me the gringo engineer. I barely understood Portuguese, but my Spanish was always good enough that it was not difficult for me to fit into local life. It wasn't a bad life until Bettina got sick. She caught a fever, quite common there, but she had no resistance to the disease and quickly fell ill and died soon after. This happened less than a year ago and is one of the reasons I returned to the States. I wanted to talk to federal prosecutors again to get me to come home permanently, and I wanted to take Consuela back to the States. I calmed down when he said that Bettina had died. I admit, I was glad that she died. It's sad, but it's true. I couldn't help but feel a little thrill of joy when I heard that he was no longer married to someone else. What does this say about me? I didn't know and didn't even want to think about it. The feds finally approved the deal, and I moved here first to begin the process of moving her. It's difficult because she is a Brazilian citizen, but officially my daughter. I never renounced my American citizenship. He looked at me for a moment before he finally sighed heavily and continued. You probably aren't very interested in this because you don't know Connie and she's nobody to you, but she's important to me. I want to give her the same life that we have. You're wrong, I care. I'm glad you want to make a new home for her here in the States. I agree with you. I can't say I'm sorry about your wife's death. I'd be lying if I said that. In a way, I'm glad she died. I know that makes me a terrible person, but I don't care. I'm glad you no longer have another wife. Al just looked at me and damn did he smile. He actually looked up at the ceiling and laughed quietly. It made me smile too. I truly was a terrible person. I understand perfectly what you mean, and I told you, our marriage was a matter of convenience. We liked each other, but we weren't in love. I was sad when she died, but more for Connie than for any other reason. There's something you need to know before we go any further. I convinced the feds to release some of the funds so I could fulfill my obligations to you when I left. Mr. Green only knew about the money I told him about. There were other things he didn't know about, and I didn't touch those remedies until now. I wanted to discuss this with the feds so I could go home and give Connie a good home. I hope you understand that I didn't tell you about the money for your own safety. I never cared about your money. This is your fault, not mine. I was happy with what we had. I liked our small house no less than the big one, as long as you were nearby. Don't you understand this? I finally realized it when I had time to think it over. I read your letter, understood how you felt, and realized that I had thrown away everything that was dear to me. Because of the problems I got myself into, I decided that it was too late to go back, and that it would be better for you if you could continue living without me. When I received your letter, it was really too late for me. Al sat with a sad expression on his face. I couldn't understand what he was thinking about, but I was happy with how our conversation had gone up to that point. He was free, wanted to return to the S. His daughter was not a problem for me, and he had his own money, so he would not feel obligated to me in any way. I could only wonder what was on his mind. Al, look at me. Why don't you continue the process of bringing Connie back to the States? In the meantime, you could move in with me. I have enough space. I think this will be helpful in convincing the immigration and state departments that you have everything in place to provide her with a good home. Don't you agree? He seemed to be considering what I said, but then suddenly froze. I'm not sure it's a good idea to move here. We are no longer married, and I don't know what that will look like. And I don't want to give the wrong impression to anyone, including you. I didn't like what he just said. I didn't understand what exactly he meant, so I decided to ask. What do you mean? What is a false impression? I love you and you love me. What else do we need? We parted under circumstances that were not pleasant. I think you forgot about this. I don't know how to feel about this yet. I need to think things over. Think about what? You know I was wrong and I admitted it. I apologized and promised that this would not happen again. I also know that you understand that I never stopped loving you. It was never about that, you know that. I believe you, but I need to think about something. For example, I would have to see Woody all the time, knowing what happened between you. I don't know how to feel about this yet. These words hurt me. I never thought about it, not even once. To me, Woody was just Jenny's husband, that's all. I didn't think about that night again after Al left. I told him about this. I begged him to believe me. I believe you, but it doesn't change what you did and what I think when I see him. You had time, but I didn't. And I'm still not sure he doesn't have his own motives. He loved you, and love doesn't just go away. He says he loves Jenny, but how true is that, or is it just a way for him to stay close to you? Al, you can't believe this. Woody is not that kind of person. I know he loves Jenny and Angie, and he never tried to get back together with me after I told him we were over. He wouldn't do that. I believe this with all my soul. So I should just forget that you spent the night with another man while we were married. It was a mistake. I swear it didn't mean anything, and all I wanted was to make you happy, but you weren't there. I had to live with this for the last 5 years, and I regretted it every day. I didn't talk to Woody or interact with him after that incident until I asked him to help Jenny. You said you understood. You said you understood why I did it. I do understand and accept responsibility for forcing you to do this, but that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It was terribly painful and still is every time I see it. Isn't it weird that he was so willing to help you after you pushed him away? And isn't it strange that the first person you turned to for help was him? I was only thinking about Jenny and how I could find her a good job so she could take care of herself and Angie. I knew that he could help her and that he felt like he owed me something. This is all I admit. Only that I could use his help, and for the sake of my daughter, I was ready to do it. Perhaps this is so. I believe that you no longer have feelings for Woody, but I am not sure that he can say the same about himself, and therefore I do not completely trust him. You'll have to deal with it. What did he tell you before the wedding that allowed you to agree to it? Can you tell me? He didn't say anything specific. He simply said that he loved our daughter and that he was going to build a good life for her and Angie. He said that he understood my distrust of him and that he could only prove it with his actions. I accepted his words, but I will never trust him. So, it turns out that I destroyed our marriage and deprived you of the opportunity to ever become friends with our daughter's husband. How can I live with this now? Just like I learned to live with the thought that you spent the night in another man's bed while you were my wife. I was devastated. I had such high hopes for us, but I didn't realize how deeply I had hurt my husband with my actions all those years ago. I accepted responsibility and knew the harm I had caused, but I never thought how deep the wound was. I think I better leave. We both need to think. I'll call you in a day or two. Good night. With these words, Al left, and I was left completely alone for the first time in the last 4 years. Since Mary, and later Jenny and Angie, came into my life, my home has been full of love and hope, almost everything I ever needed. I just missed my husband, and I never forgot about him. I waited, confident that he would return sooner or later. I built my life on this dream. Now this dream was on the verge of turning into a nightmare. I constantly thought about Al and what he told me. I couldn't help but think that he was wrong, but at the same time I understood that he had the right to feel how he felt about my actions. He was also allowed to think the way he thought about Woody. I didn't believe it, but Al did, and that was the main thing. I had to come up with something to change his mind. The next day, I received a call from Jenny and Angie from Florida. They were happy and having a good time. Jenny seemed very happy, and I could hear in her voice that Angie was delighted. We talked for a while, and finally, I hung up feeling good about their new life. I began to have an idea that I hoped would help resolve the situation with Al, but I was not ready to voice it yet. I wanted to see how things would go first. Al called that afternoon after I spoke with Jenny. He asked if I had heard news from them, and I told him everything. He was especially interested in how Angie reacted and seemed pleased with her story about Disneyland. We agreed to meet for dinner that evening, and I just wanted to spend time with Al. I promised myself that our conversation would be easy and that I wouldn't bring up our future again until I was ready. I put on my best outfit, a skirt and blouse that I knew would catch his attention. The skirt was quite tight and short, but quite suitable for a woman my age. I put on my heels, knowing that my legs were still one of my best features. She completed the look with a simple pearl necklace and pearl earrings. I left my hair down because I knew Al always preferred it that way. I was more ready than ever. He picked me up, gave me a few compliments, and we went to dinner at a nice restaurant, where my outfit fit perfectly into the atmosphere. Al was wearing a casual suit and tie, looking fit and fresh, as if his time in Brazil had done him good. Dinner was wonderful. We talked as before, about everything and nothing. We talked a little about the newlyweds, about their plans, and where they were going to live. We avoided difficult topics by mutual agreement. The evening went well. After dinner, we went to his house, and he invited me for a glass of wine. He already had a chilled bottle and some cakes ready, so he had obviously planned everything in advance. I didn't mind and even hoped that the rest of the evening might take an interesting and perhaps even spicy turn. But everything was in his hands, and I decided to follow him. As we drank our first glass of wine, Al looked at me seriously. He clearly wanted to say something, and I waited, showing all my readiness to listen. I have planned to return to Brazil next week to pick up Connie. I've talked to the State Department and the Brazilian Directorate of Immigration, and everything is ready. I'm going back with Connie in 2 weeks. This will be my last trip to Brazil, and I will be able to close this chapter of my life. Connie will start a new life here with me. This is wonderful news. I know how happy you must be that you can finally bring her home. Do you already have any other plans? No, the main thing for me is to bring her here. This has been my goal for a long time. Wonderful. Then you need to follow this plan. How can I help? Do you want me to prepare a place for the little girl? I can buy everything she needs and arrange it so that when she arrives, she has a cozy corner. Just tell me more about her. That would be great if you don't mind. I really want her visit to be as pleasant as possible. Besides, the presence of a woman would be beneficial for her. A little girl needs support, and you would be great at it. Consider it already done. You can forget about it and leave everything to me. Now, is there anything else you want to talk about? I don't need to go anywhere because now I'm only responsible for myself. And besides, I don't really want to return alone to this empty house. Well, you could stay here if you want. I have a spare room so you won't have to travel tonight. That's not what I meant. I would still feel lonely in a separate room. We need something better than this. Well, I don't know. I haven't been with a woman in over a year, and I'm not sure if I remember what to do. Do you think you could help me? I gave him the most playful smile and said, I'm sure I can. But then I became more serious. Do you remember our game of pleasure or pain, Al? Do you sometimes think about us in this way? I know that I never forgot us and missed us very much. I miss you every time I think about what we had. Can you remember this without the pain I caused you? I never forgot you. And yes, I can remember it without pain. While we are alone, I can only remember good things. This is what makes everything so difficult. Now it's not just you and me anymore. But today it's just like that, just you and me, and our memories of the good things we had. About the good moments of our marriage, before the pain and betrayal. We can remember the good things for a while. We owe it to ourselves. I walked up to him and hugged him, pressed his head to my chest and stroked his hair, kissing his forehead. I held him until I felt him begin to respond, and then I stepped back to let him take control. He hesitated only for a moment, and then pulled me by the hand towards a small bedroom at the back of the house. I followed him, feeling a surge of hope that we could rekindle the passion that once connected us before I ruined everything. The bedroom had a double bed, a chest of drawers, and a nightstand, but nothing extra. It was a man's bedroom. He made me stand in front of the bed and hugged me, holding me close to him. I felt his arousal on my stomach and smiled, enjoying his closeness after so many years. I pressed myself tightly to him, wrapping my arms around his neck, in no hurry to move on to something more. Still leaving him room to take the initiative, I let him lead. He became more and more confident and lifted my face to kiss me. His kiss was so tender that it almost brought tears to my eyes. I kissed him back until I felt his tongue begin to touch my lips. Surprised, I opened my mouth, and he penetrated inside. Feeling him so close again, I felt excitement and desire that had been building up in me for a long time. I put one hand on his thigh, pulling him even closer, and with the other hand I touched his arousal. I began to caress him slowly, trying not to be too persistent, but responding to the growing excitement. He just moaned quietly in pleasure, so I continued. I was about to undo his zipper with my other hand when he gently pulled me away. I was afraid that he had changed his mind, but he quickly showed that this was not the case by starting to unbutton the buttons on my blouse. I relaxed and allowed him to slowly unfasten them, one by one. When he took off my blouse, I raised my hands so he could unclasp my bra. Looking straight into his eyes, I saw what I had hoped to see for so long: passion and desire. It was exactly what I was hoping for. I walked closer to him as he found the clasp on my skirt and slowly pulled it down, leaving me only wearing lace panties, which I put on with the hope that they would see this moment. When I reached out to him to take off his clothes, he stopped me, holding my hand, and quickly took off his shirt and trousers, sliding them down without further ado. Pushing his clothes away from him, he put his hands on my shoulders, gently pushing me towards the edge of the bed. I sat down obediently, ready for what came next. "What do you want, Angie? Pleasure or pain?" "I want to do this right, after so many years of trying to push you away. I don't want to make a mistake." I looked at this man whom I had loved almost all my life. He asked me what to do to make me feel good. It was everything I wanted. I didn't care what he did, as long as he was next to me. I wanted him to understand this. "I don't care what you do to me, Al. You have already fulfilled my dreams just by coming back to me. I want you to take me and make me your wife again. I don't need pleasure or pain, I only need you. It's your choice, and I will do whatever you want. I am yours, now and forever." He came closer and gently laid me down on the bed. I made myself comfortable on top, feeling how his arms surrounded me with warmth and care. It was something special, a moment when we could give ourselves completely to each other, leaving all our worries outside this room. He looked at me with a gentle smile, and I answered him, feeling a little excitement, as if I was rediscovering him for myself. His hands slowly slid over my shoulders, touching me so carefully, as if he was afraid to frighten away this tremulous moment. At that moment, a special feeling of trust and intimacy arose between us. After so many years of living together, I knew how my body would respond to his touch, and I was ready for everything that this moment could give. We moved so smoothly and naturally, as if we were one, able to understand each other without words. Feeling how completely I relaxed, he slowed down his movements a little, giving me time to enjoy every moment. His warm smile filled me with confidence, and I felt the tenderness and care gradually turn into a more intense, deeper feeling. My body responded, responding to his caresses with a feeling that was not only passion, but also something more: gratitude for his patience and understanding, for his willingness to always be there. At some point, succumbing to these feelings, I raised my knees, allowing him to be even closer. This position was special to us. We always felt a special closeness when we were like this. His movements became more and more confident, deeper. They were filled with feeling and strength. I understood that now he is not just next to me, he protects and supports me, bringing stability and confidence to my world. And I, accepting his hugs, gratefully accepted everything he gave me, knowing that this was my man, my faithful companion. After a while, his movements began to speed up, as if he felt that his climax was close. His breathing became more rapid and his eyes became even more focused. He quietly whispered in my ear that he would soon reach this moment, and by hugging him tightly, I made it clear that I shared this feeling with him and was ready for it. We froze in our arms, experiencing this entire moment with a single rhythm, filled with warmth and calm confidence in each other. I felt him hug me, and this filled me with calm happiness. We stayed like that, breathing in unison and enjoying the moment when there was nothing superfluous between us, only sincerity and intimacy. It was a moment that we wanted to stay in forever, feeling our heart beat in rhythm and simply enjoying his presence next to us. When Al regained his breath, he carefully pulled himself free and rolled onto his back. His breathing gradually became even, and soon he turned to me, lying next to him. "I'm sorry I couldn't wait for you, but it's been so long. How can I please you? Just hug me and let me feel that you are near." For me, it was never all about the physical. The main thing is the love that I felt every time we were together, like now. I remember. I missed it so much. I thought about you at night, but at some point I had to stop, otherwise I would have gone crazy. Latina and I have never been so close, and that's why I missed you even more. Thank you for this. I snuggled up to him and just hugged him. I was happy. My beloved man was next to me again, and I was ready to do anything to keep it. I decided that before the end of this evening, I would definitely talk to him about my plans. I'm going to take a shower. Would you like to join? I can wash your back and maybe a few other things if you want. I think I should calm down a little first. This was the first time for me after such a long break. Do you mind? I don't mind at all. I already said, I am yours and I will do what you want. If you want to relax, that's great. I got up and went to the small bathroom to take a quick shower and freshen up. I had something to tell him and I wanted to be fresh and ready when he was ready too. After my shower, I got dressed and went to the kitchen to make us some juice and toast. Al always liked juice and toast after intimacy. He said it brought his sugar levels back to normal. Al walked into the kitchen and sat down at the table, watching me move around the kitchen with a look of contentment on his face. Now I was calm and happy, and with a small gesture I handed him toast and a glass of juice. You remember? And now I'm glad about it, because at my age I need sugar more than ever. He smiled, taking a sip of juice. You didn't seem old to me just recently. You were everything I could want or dream of. I don't think you need more than what you have, I said, smiling at him. We sat in silence, feeling close and comfortable with each other. I looked at him, enjoying this moment, and felt truly happy and satisfied. Mary, Jenny, and even Angie filled my life with joy and made me happy, but there was always an empty space in my soul that nothing could fill, and it kept me from being completely happy. Now that emptiness was gone, and I knew that I now had everything I ever wanted. Now is the time. Al, I have some thoughts. I want to share with you what I plan to do while you are in Brazil, preparing Connie for the move. He looked at me curiously and silently waited for me to continue. I want to put the house up for sale and send the furniture into storage. I'll hand in my resignation next week and get everything sorted out so I'm ready for the change. Ready for what? Why do you want to sell such a beautiful house and quit your job? He asked, looking at me in surprise. I was thinking about what you said the other day. One of your biggest challenges is seeing Woody every time we meet Jenny and Angie. I can't separate them or cut them out of my life completely, but we can move far enough away so we don't see them too often. Then I could sometimes go to them alone or invite Jenny and Angie to join us. This way, you won't have to meet Woody, and he won't remind you of the past. I watched his reaction carefully as I spoke. I thought about this plan and thought it was the best way to overcome his negative feelings towards Woody. Not having Woody around all the time would make our lives a lot easier. I was willing to go to the lengths of not seeing Jenny and Angie every day if it meant Al would stay with me. Al is my life. I had lived without Jenny and Angie for many years and found them again. But having lost Alia for 5 years, I didn't want to experience this anymore. I made my choice. Al sat staring at me with an incomprehensible expression on his face. I didn't know what he was thinking, but I wanted to convince him that I was ready to do anything for him. Al, it doesn't matter to me that they won't be around if you're next to me. I thought about it for a long time and made a decision. My choice is you. Don't you understand? This way you won't have to see him, and we can be together. Tonight is proof of that. They weren't here, and it was just the two of us. We made love, and it was wonderful. Please, can't you see that this is the only way? Al was listening to me, and suddenly he started laughing. It was a happy, contented laugh, and my heart rejoiced along with it. He understood me and was pleased with my plan. I laughed too, releasing all the joy that had accumulated inside me, rejoicing with the man I loved more than life itself. When he finally calmed down, he stood up and walked over to me. He took my face in his hands and lifted me up so I could look into his eyes. I love you more than ever. I was a fool, and you just showed me that. I don't care what happened between you and Woody. Now I understand that you are ready to sacrifice everything for me, and that is enough for me. We don't have to move away and give up our son-in-law. He is not a threat to me, and I don't care other than that he treats our daughter and granddaughter well. So you and I will live in this wonderful house, and we will create a new life for our daughter, and she will be able to visit her half-sister whenever she wants. I screamed with joy and threw myself on his neck. Now I had everything. The husband I loved with all my heart, the daughter I once lost and found again, a granddaughter I didn't even know existed. Now I had a new stepdaughter who I would happily welcome into my ideal life and give her all the love I carried in my heart. Later, sitting in the small kitchen where I found my husband again, I remembered the very kitchen where my world began to crumble. I made just one mistake. I turned to another person, moving away from my husband, and it almost destroyed me. I survived and learned a lesson that I was going to pass on to all three women who were now part of my life. I will do everything to let them know how important it is not to repeat the mistake that I made. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.